April 22nd. If you'll please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Gene, if you'll lead us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, roll call.
Chair Mulhart?
Here.
Director Craven?
Here.
Director West?
Here.
Director Borchard?
Here. Okay, I see Andy Waters, I see Bob Aranio, and those are the only two alternates I see in the audience. Okay? I think that's correct. Anybody that I missed? All right. Agenda review, Jeff?
Nothing to change.
Okay, a motion to approve,
So moved.
and a second?
Second.
Okay, hearing no objections, so ordered. Public comments, opportunity for the public to address GMA on non-agenda items. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chair Mulhart, directors and staff. Steve Nash, resident of Oxnard. And we just fired up our advanced water purification facility. Now, it's only running at 5 to 10% of capacity. That leaves upwards of 95% of its potential production available for replenishment. Now, I strongly urge Fox Canyon to get on the ball and implement their replenishment program. I figured it might take $50 an acre foot to purchase this water that the AWPF is producing. That might seem like a lot of money, but the days of water costing, $6 an acre foot plus pumping charges, those days are over. Whether an acre foot costs $1,000, $1,500, $1,800, that's the new reality, and we have to learn to live with that. So please, the sooner that we are able to expand Oxnard's production. Right now it's running on one skid, 7,000 acre feet a year. There's the potential for 4 skids, 28,000 acre feet. This is new water. We have this is the direction we have to go, folks. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon, Jeanette Lombardo, California Food and Agribusiness Advocates. Just want to give a status update. And last month in March, we held a PTP users group meeting on the Oxnard Plain. We elected a board of directors that is starting that group. On Friday, I've received direction and support to start the Oxnard Plain pumping group, and I will be doing that over the next 3 months. So just wanted to let you know that we're doing that, and I'll be contacting the staff for some information.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
My comments may be more relevant to agenda item 6, but I'll just throw them in there.
Well, if it is relevant to agenda item 6, we'll have public session for item 6. So if you'd like to wait until then.
Let me wait.
Okay, very good. Anybody else? Okay, board member comments? Charlotte? Dave? Gene? Steve? Okay, very good. Okay, we have a consent item, which is the approval of the minutes.
Move the approval.
A motion.
Nice, Dave.
Second. Any objection? Hearing none, so ordered. All right, informational items. First item up. Jeff.
That's item number 2. I'll just introduce it briefly, if you don't mind, Chair Mulhart, from here. We have with us today the Chief Operating Officer of Job Performance Associates. That's the firm that we chose after your board authorized us to go out for the training software that we talked with you about last year. We are pretty excited about this. We think that when we selected this firm, we did it for a very specific reason, the ways that they train you, the ease of use. You're going to see a demonstration of the software. Unfortunately, they're still working on the sound. There's a sound component with the training software as well. Also, out in the lobby are these cards. You see the front and back view. Designed with QR codes on the back. So you can download this job performance aid just by scanning this with your cell phone. You might even want to try that here, or Mike may do it for you. Well, and without further ado, I'll introduce Mike Lee, the Chief Operating Officer for Job Performance Associates.
Okay.
Back with you today.
All right,
We've
Mike.
been working on this for the last...
Mike, I need you to, so I can get it recorded, so
Sure
thank
thing.
you.
Glad to be here with you today. We've been working on this over the last few months. It is live now, so as you see by the card that we have here, you can access it with a quick reference code, but you can also go to the URL that's listed there, pull it up with desktop, laptop, so it's pretty universal as far as the way that it plays. As far as access to this, we wanted to design something that was going to be as easy as possible for the users to actually pick it up and access it out in the field. So with a quick reference code, if they don't have one on the phone, it's a free download. Whether they have an Apple or a Droid, they just Google QR reader, and they can download the app to go on their phone. Once they have that on their phone, it's and this is kind of just as an example, using my phone. I have an app here, and we have the code as we see here. I scan that code. It uses the camera on the phone to pull it up. And as we're looking at that, basically it's going to pull up what we'll show you next. And it's the job performance aid that's there. And it basically introduces you to the software as far as everything that you're using in the system. And then it goes to the hardware side when you're actually getting the readings themselves, and if you have to do calibration out in the field. So at this point, we want to switch over, and they've pulled it up upstairs. So hopefully we can grab this. Jessica, have them switch to the other. Okay. So if we went, for example, here to the message that comes across on this, and bear with me just one second. And looking down here.
During these challenging times of water conservation, being a regulating agency and a well owner or operator is not easy. But doing your part as a well owner or operator should not be difficult. We've created a tool that will help you comply with agency regulations. You can use a mobile app to scan the QR code with a smart device. It will launch an interactive guide designed to answer your questions. You can also access this information from your desktop or laptop computer at www.fcgma.org/JPA.
And as you can kind of see down here in the lower area, this is when you're on a phone, you're going to want to use this to go full screen with it because it's a little hard to see. Desktop or laptop, no problem viewing it from what you see right here. Let me go up here, and we'll go, in fact, normally you just go ahead and we'll close this and go to show you some other, again, I apologize here using the cursor here, but let's go back up here. And this is what we mean by an introduction to the system itself. And
Welcome to the FCGMA Well Owner Operator Job Performance Aid, JPA. This JPA is designed to help you understand how to navigate the FCGMA online database. If you would like to begin, click the next button. If you would like more information about the use and navigation of this JPA, select Contents and then User Guide.
if we go over here to Contents, as an example, and let's see, there we go. And you go up here to the user guide. If somebody's never looked at one of these before, it's pretty intuitive as far as the way to operate it, but it gives you an explanation as you can kind of scroll through the navigation here. And again, it's a little more complicated for me because I'm using this device in my hand and all this is being displayed from another room. But with desktop, laptop, all pretty easy. When we come into this too, we talk about specific applications, agricultural, municipal, and domestic. If we went into the ag application as an example here, it's going to take you through the entire process here. And in that area that I was in before, it would give you an explanation of everything that's involved in the software. Here it's going to give you some extra tips too. For example, this would be like talking with somebody back here in the office and getting a little help from an expert. And we'll look at this mentoring here for just a second.
Learn how to read your meter by clicking on the blue question mark in the current meter reading column. A separate window will open. Use the meter types drop-down to select your model. Who manufactured your meter? Make a selection in the meter types drop-down box. A photo will appear with visual instructions. If the manufacturer of your meter is not listed above, please contact agency staff for assistance. Please have a legible photograph of the meter face available to provide to staff. To exit this mentor, click the Close button in the upper right corner of the video screen.
And when they're giving you instructions up here, for example, to close the mentor, we'll go here. And this is basically a webinar that takes you through the entire process as you're seeing here when we start this process. And I'm giving you just one example. There's a lot more to it, but to show you the functionality.
Under operator information, please update your mailing address, business name, contact name, phone number, and/or email, if it has changed. Click Update Operator Info to save your changes. Scroll down to Extraction Information. Identify the well and serial number you are entering a meter reading for. Locate the column for current meter reading and enter your reading without any decimals or spaces. Click Calculate. The system will calculate the total acre feet extracted. Please see the Full Meter Reading Help tool if you have questions about how to read your meter. Verify multiplier and divisor are correct for your meter. See the Full Meter Reading Help tool mentor to learn how to check the multiplier and divisor for your meter. Please contact agency staff immediately if the information requires updating.
So it's like somebody's taking you in a webinar through the entire process, so it's not a continuously running video. It breaks it into the steps that you see here. I'll give you an example, too, because this is what some folks were having some confusion with before, and this is actually working with the mapping feature itself to give you an idea of how well that's addressed. Let's take a look here.
Click on GIS Map Lookup. Click More. Then choose Parcel Labels. Open Parcel Labels by clicking the left triangle next to Parcel Labels. Then choose Assessor's Parcel Number and Acreage. Click the Draw and Measure icon on the top ribbon. Choose Draw Polygon. Then click Show Measurements. Change distance units to feet. Change area units to acres. Choose your color and font. Click on the map to begin measuring and shading your parcels. A single click will create a point. Double-click to complete your measurement. The area measurement will be displayed on your map. To add text to your map, click on the Add Text icon under Draw and Measure. Type the text and choose the font style, size, and color. Click on the location of the map where you want your text to be placed. Wells will be plotted on the map as either active, destroyed, or inactive. To identify your wells, use the Add Text icon under Draw and Measure. Type the state well number and choose the font style, size, and color. Click on the appropriate well plot to place your text.
So as you can see, there's nothing that we're leaving out of that. The last thing that I wanted to kind of address here is getting down to the meter calibrations. And this is where we cover a lot of the regulatory information. So again, it's all in here. If we take a look at this, and I'll just give you a sampling from the introduction as we go into this. Here we go. Let's go just past this and show you an overview. And here we go.
On behalf of the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency staff, thank you for allowing us this opportunity to provide you with information regarding the flow meter calibration program. The key topics that will be discussed during this section of the training are flow meter calibration program authorization, brief history, exemptions, types of flow meters, calibrations, installation, repair, and replacement, first-time installation of a flow meter, failed calibration tests, reviewing flow meter data, 5-year waivers, notices and penalties.
And as we look here, you can see that we've identified all the topics over here on the left. And as you go through the contents here, I'll kind of come down here just a second. You could go to any one of those areas. It's not like you're forced to go through all of them. And that's where I want to kind of emphasize that this is a nice review tool, but you've got to be realistic. When folks are out there in the field, they're not going to want to go through all this. They want to get to exactly where they want to be. If they need the explanation, it's there. It's designed for the fastest user or learner, so somebody that's really quick doesn't get frustrated with it. But if you're slower, stop it, pause it, play with it going through. It's not going to leave anyone behind. So this is designed to make it simple for everyone out there. Smartphones, obviously, desktops, laptops, but also here there's bank of computers so that if somebody didn't have any of that available to them, they could come in here to use it to do their reporting. The value of this, obviously, is when you're out there in the field, you've got this information immediately available to you so that you can go ahead and work with your meters that are out there to do everything you would need to do in the field. You don't have to scribble down some notes to take you with you. It's all there. So
Okay,
thanks for
good.
the time.
Thank you.
Oh, Mike, you might also mention that this is very modular. It's designed so that we, staff, can update it. That's the reason for the robotic voice. and not a human's voice talking. It's just a very robust way to train. You can read, or you can listen, or you can do both. And I'd also like to thank, the content, much of it is due to Jessica and Mandy. They are the ones who field these questions. They're the ones who know what the people ask about frequently and where we need the most help. And so a big nod of the head to them for all their work on this.
Very good. Excellent.
I guess I would point one other thing out there too, Jeff. As far as the modular approach to this, as changes come in the future, particularly with software, if a change happens today, we can have it updated within 24 hours to have it current, what you see there.
Wow, good. Any members have any questions, comments, or anybody in the audience? Questions or comments? Okay, Mike, thank you very much. Excellent. Very good. Okay, let's go to item 3, please. I got a receive and file.
Move to receive and file.
Any objection? So ordered. Okay, item 3.
Good afternoon, Chair Mulhart, board members, members of the audience, Gerhard Hubner. I will be introducing this item. This is an item and a presentation from the Las Posas Users Group and their work on a pumping allocation methodology proposal. With that, I would like to turn it over to Brian Bondi. Brian will take it from here.
Okay, thank you, Gerhard. Good afternoon, directors, agency staff, audience. Thank you for the opportunity to present something that we've been putting a lot of hard work into at Las Posas Users Group. I'll start with the overview of what we're going to talk about today. Four points. The purpose of the allocation proposal, why LPUG's working on this. Talk a little bit about some unique attributes of the Las Posas Basin that we considered in developing this proposal. Some desirable attributes for an allocation system, at least from LPUG's perspective, and then lastly we'll go through a summary of the proposal. So the purpose of the proposal, this is actually something we started last fall following the adoption of Emergency Ordinance E. There had been a lot of discussion about the need for developing long-term solutions, so we thought one logical place to start would be to figure out how we might propose to come up with a new allocation system that addressed sustainability and some of the challenges with the existing programs that the agency has, which we all know well. They've been discussed in a lot of detail over the last year or so. And then came along the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, so nothing we're doing in terms of developing a long-term proposal would be necessarily inconsistent with that. This is something that we feel could be used as part of a sustainability plan. What we did is try to tailor the proposed allocation system to the unique attributes of the Las Posas Basin and the needs of the users in the basin, while at the same time trying to achieve sustainability. I do want to emphasize that the purpose of the proposal is not necessarily to propose something for the entirety of the GMA. Again, we were very focused on trying to figure out what works for the folks in the Las Posas Basin. That's not to say that there may not be some components that would work in other areas, but we don't want to presume that they would. We feel that users in the other areas should weigh in based on their needs and the attributes of their areas. And some of the unique attributes will make a little more sense. In fact, I'll just roll into those. One of the biggest issues that this agency and the stakeholders deal with in the Las Posas Basin is there's quite a bit of unirrigated land. Thousands of acres, in fact, that to some degree may be potentially irrigable. And that's shown here with some of the hillside planting in this figure that's been going on. That's the area where there's major opportunity for additional potential development for ag. That's a big issue. How do you deal with an allocation system that addresses sustainable management but also doesn't squash property rights? That's one of the key balances that we're trying to address in our proposal. And it's something that probably isn't much of an issue, if at all, in the other parts of the agency. You go out in the Oxnard Plain, I challenge you to find 100 acres that isn't planted. Probably can't do it. Cropping patterns. Again, compared to Oxnard Plain, other parts of the basin, we have, on a percentage basis, more permanent crops in the Las Posas Basin. So needing to be able to allocate water in a manner that considers those needs, which are different from row crops, which is the majority of what you see in the Oxnard Plain as a consideration. Because we have a lot of permanent crops, we have perhaps a wider range in irrigation demands in the basin compared to other areas, perhaps, ranging from very efficient citrus down near the 1 acre-foot per acre threshold all the way up to higher quantities that are needed by row crops and some of the berry crops. Water balance and yield. We think that the timing and magnitude of necessary pumping reductions in the Las Posas Basin will probably be different than other areas, for example, Oxnard Plain. And so that's a reason for having an allocation system that works in one area perhaps differently than in others. So you can adapt to the timing and magnitude of your water shortages. Basin replenishment. We also think that the projects that would replenish the Las Posas Basin are probably not the same projects that will be used to replenish the Oxnard Plain Basin and the coastal plain. And that's simply just because of where the infrastructure is, where the creeks are, where, and so on and so forth. So in an ideally, in a perfect world, your replenishment program and your allocation program would work together to achieve sustainability. So,
Mr. Bondi, are those years down at the bottom or quarters? I just want to be sure.
Those are years.
Thank you.
And this is the same graph I presented in January that we actually talked about a bit. So ideally, the replenishment program and the allocation system would work together to achieve sustainability. So your replenishment fees may be based on exceeding an allocation. You want those things to work together. And so to the extent that the projects may be different than other parts of the agency, you might want to consider having an allocation system that's different so those two can work together. Some other issues that have some differences with the rest of the agency: water quality. We have water quality issues. We've talked about them at different points over the years. They have different sources, severity, and potential solutions than other areas of the basin. So seawater intrusion example versus the situation we have along the Arroyo. Surface water, we have no surface water diversion, so we do not have a surface water source other than, if you consider imported water, surface water. So that's another key difference compared to the PTP system, PV's surface water deliveries from United. We have two, what we're calling here, multi-purpose water systems. There's probably a better term for that. The key point here is they deliver potable water to both domestic, municipal, industrial users, but also agriculture. And that creates some unique situations when you start talking about transfers or customers leaving the water system on the ag side. It creates some issues that you may not have in other areas. And of course, we have aquifer storage and recovery with the Callegas ASR project. Within the Las Posas Basin, we have three distinct management subareas that we're proposing, that this proposal could be applied to each area, each management subarea. We have, this is the whole of the valley, some more parks over here, Camarillo's down here. We have a western management area, an eastern management area, and then there's a small aquifer called the Epworth Gravels Aquifer up near the Broadway, Fairview area that, by all accounts, seems to operate independent of the other aquifers. And there's probably 24 wells or so in that area that some of those owners feel they should be managed separately from the Fox Canyon system. And so our proposal could be applied in a manner that it applies to that separately from the rest of the management area. Okay. Of course, there's the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and it calls for planning for each basin, and that may be something that's achieved in a global plan or separate plans. I think that hasn't been discussed, but at some level there will be planning for each basin, and so there's a basis for designing allocations for different areas within that. And of course, connectivity between the different basins is important and would need to be considered in all of this. So LPUG actually spent quite a bit of time, actually not LPUG. LPUG formed a subcommittee, a working group to come up with this proposal. They've met over 10 times since last fall, and one of the first things that we did was figure out what we felt were desirable attributes for an allocation. What would we want to have in an allocation system? Of course, providing a mechanism for sustainable groundwater management, that's more of a prerequisite than a desirable attribute, but nonetheless we list it at the top because it's the key, it's why we're all here. We spent a lot of time talking about groundwater rights principles, what would happen in adjudications, trying to understand people's perspectives on water rights, and came up with this principle of trying to respect groundwater rights to the maximum extent possible, but also at the same time minimizing undue hardships. And I'll talk a little bit about that on a following slide. Folks wanted to provide as much reasonable certainty as possible for their business planning, so as much certainty, and we've built in some components that provide periods of where things are fixed and won't change to provide some certainty for planning. They wanted flexibility. They want the ability to trade allocations and do things like that to maximize their flexibility from year to year. Felt very strongly about having the ability to have a water market, the transferability of allocations to encourage conservation, and really to be a key way of providing that flexibility. We also need to address pumping for groundwater desalters. We have projects that are being contemplated, so it needs to address that. And of course, groundwater storage. I'm not going to go through the different groundwater rights principles. That probably be a subject for another, for a workshop or something, but suffice it to say we considered these. Again, we talked a lot about what happens in adjudications, and grossly simplifying it in a general sense in adjudication, and I don't know if Saperstein's here or not to correct me, but you look at the last 5 years of pumping, you're given an initial allocation and you're cut back. That would be, in general, without a stipulated judgment, that would generally be how it goes. And we came to the conclusion that a strict water rights-based approach along those lines would harm the very low-end water users, the very efficient water users, so say the very efficient citrus growers, would immediately be forced into taking trees out. And we felt that that approach would be an undue hardship. So we came up with something that was a little bit different, and that's what the basis for what we'll go through. But we did consider all of these rights: overlying, appropriative, prescriptive, imported water return flows. That's primarily the waterworks district. They buy imported water. The water ends up going through the treatment plant and recharged back into the aquifer. They would have some rights to that water. We considered that, as well as storage rights. I'm not going to go through this full list, but this list is all of the elements of our proposal. We actually have a very detailed proposal outline that we are working on completing. We have some details in there that we haven't sorted out as a group that will be available in the near future. So there's a lot of work and a lot of written material behind these components, but we felt that in discussions with staff that it would be better to just present this in an overview today. So that's what we're doing. So the core of the proposal revolves around this concept of allocation pools, and this is a concept that comes from adjudications. There would be two pools of basically taking the yield of the management area and dividing it into the two pools, and that would be based on pumping from the 2009 through 13 period. It's a recent 5-year period. When we started this process in 2014, the most recent 5 years was 09 through 13. Again, typically what happens in adjudication, you look at the most recent 5 years. So the two pools would share the yield of the management area based on their relative pumping during that 5-year period. Within the overlier pools, you would have landowners who pump wells for either domestic supply, ag, industrial, or other. We have some horse properties and other things like that in the Las Posas Basin. Mutual water companies would also fit under the overlier category because, in essence, they're pumping the water rights of their shareholders on their behalf. The only true appropriators we have in the basin are County Waterworks 1 and 19. So they would essentially have their own pool. Within the pools, we would establish initial allocations for each user in the pool. And again, that would be based on that 09 through 13 pumping. We're proposing to do things a little bit different than the GMA has done in the past in terms of assigning the allocations for landowners. The group felt pretty strongly that the allocation should be assigned to the land, not the well, in order to be consistent with how water rights are handled in adjudications. They're pertinent to the land. So we felt it's important to do that. That has some benefits in terms of clarity of rights or entitlements, and it also may deal with some of the more challenging compliance issues in terms of water transfers and things that your board has dealt with in the past. For everyone else, the water systems, it would remain a lot like it is today. The water system has an allocation. They decide internally how they're going to utilize that allocation for either their customers or shareholders. Okay, the important part, reducing the allocations to achieve or maintain sustainable yield. We're proposing that we would take those allocations based on the 2009 through 13 period. They would exceed the yield, so they would need to be reduced. The question is, what's the timing to do that? And the proposal would be to phase in that over 10 years. Again, this is consistent. When a water rights judgment is issued, there's typically what's called a ramp down period. So essentially, we're proposing a ramp down period to make the allocations equal to the yield. Functionally, we propose that allocations be fixed for 5 years at a time. This gets back to providing some certainty for business planning. We're going to call that a fixed allocation period. The reason for the fixed allocation period of 5 years is if you look at the SGMA regulations, they have built in these 5-year milestone periods. We've tried to align as much of this proposal with those 5-year milestone periods since there's going to be a reporting element to the DWR, and so on and so forth. It makes sense to try and have everything happening every 5 years, at least from our perspective. During the 4th year of each one of these fixed allocation periods, there would be a review, an analysis to determine any changes to the basin yield. If the basin yield is changed, most likely downward, the allocations would then be adjusted for the upcoming fixed allocation period to match the yield. That's how we stay sustainable. Every 5 years, we adjust to make sure we're matching with the available water. And functionally, this would happen. Each pool would be reduced proportionally. Okay? And I have an example coming to show how this would work. Within the overlying pool, again, I talked earlier about the very efficient citrus growers. In an attempt to protect those very low, very efficient water users, we've come up with this concept of a minimum allocation within the overlying pool. And the concept is that if you've already been reduced to your minimum allocation, you would no longer be reduced anymore. The remaining folks who are above their minimum allocation would take on the burden of the reduction to achieve the overall necessary reduction to stay in balance. Again, I'll go through the example. It'll be a little clearer. So for these minimum allocations, we've also referred to this as an allocation floor. Sustainable Groundwater Management Act proposes 2 acre-feet per year for domestics, so we're just staying in line with that. We have not come up with a number for agriculture. We've had a lot of discussion of possibly basing it on efficient citrus irrigation water duties, but there's other ways to do it. This is one area of detail that LPUG still needs to sort out to have a complete proposal.
Brian,
Yes,
can I back up for a second? On the first bullet point, it says if current allocation equals minimum pool, no reduction. Then it says if current allocation equals minimum allocation.
That should be a greater than sign.
Okay,
in the
thank
second
you.
bullet.
That
I
made
apologize.
no sense at all. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good catch.
I was puzzling over that, too.
Sorry. I'm actually looking.
No, that's a good catch. So for the appropriators pool, we have not proposed an explicit floor or minimum allocation. Again, the appropriators are going to have a bulk allocation. Internally, they're going to decide what customers get, and that's a process that we felt LPUG and the GMA didn't need to be part of. And so they can do what they need to do internally. Okay, so let's run through an example. Hypothetical. You have a groundwater management area with a yield of 10,000 acre-feet. You have an overlier's pool with 8,000 acre-feet per year, appropriator's pool with 2,000. And we're in that fourth year of the fixed allocation period. We review the yield. We realize, okay, the yield has decreased to 9,000 acre-feet per year. So we need a 10% reduction to maintain balance. So each pool would be reduced by 10%. That's what these columns are showing. And then I'll go through a table to explain how the minimum allocation comes into play. So in this scenario, we're saying there's going to be 5 groundwater users in the overlying pool, just to keep it simple. The first overlier has a current allocation of 500 and a minimum allocation of 500, so they would have no reduction. They're already at their minimum. Second user, current allocation 1,500, their minimum allocation 1,500, again, no reduction. For the third user, you see they have a current of 1,500, a minimum of 1,400, so you could reduce them by 100, which would bring them down to their minimum allocation. Then they'd be done. That would be a 7% reduction for that user. The fourth and fifth users here have much higher current allocations, 2,000 and 2,500. They both have a minimum of 1,000. They are going to take on the brunt of the reduction. If you do the math to figure out what needs to be done and the relative proportion of their allocation, it comes out to 311 for number 4 and 389 for number 5. And when you add that all up, you get your 800 that you needed for an overall 10% reduction. This is how we would propose it works. So getting back to the concept of adhering to water rights but preventing undue hardships, this provides a bridge to something that's more of a flat allocation approach. In fact, our first proposal was figure out a straight flat allocation where each user would get the same amount based on their acreage. And we felt that was too different from a water rights-based approach, that the concern was that somebody who's not participating would say, that is so different from what would happen in an adjudication. I feel like you're squashing my rights. You're cutting me way back immediately. So we went back to the water rights approach, but this is really a bridge from that to something that's more flat, and it'll happen over time. So one of the important considerations is, what do we do if all of the overliers get reduced to their minimum allocation? You could have a real problem there. Two cases, two options. If there is, and we hope that over time we're going to develop a replenishment program in the basin, if there's sufficient replenishment water, you may not need to do anything. You might be able to just keep the allocations where they are. As long as there's enough replenishment water to make the basin whole, you just establish fees in line with what's necessary to do that. If we're in the situation where we do not have enough replenishment water, that's the bad situation, and you would have to then at that point consider reducing those minimum allocations to keep the basin in balance. We hope that we live in a world with option number 1, but we need to have option number 2 in there to have a complete proposal to deal with all possible eventualities.
Could I ask, in option 2, what would happen with the appropriators?
They would continue to be reduced proportionally as well. So each pool gets reduced. Mm-hmm. The minimum allocations only come to play within the overlier pool.
Mm-hmm. So they'd continue to get the cuts?
Yes. Okay. Unirrigated land, again, one of the big issues that we're facing here. So we're proposing to utilize this minimum allocation as a tool to address unirrigated land. Essentially, the proposal is, if somebody wants to come in and develop previously unirrigated land, put it into production, they can do that. They will receive the minimum allocation so that they would be treated eventually the same as everybody else in the basin. I'll get to it a little bit later, but we're proposing a water market transfer program, and we would propose that somebody who comes in new would have to use their water for 5 years to vest in that minimum allocation before they'd be eligible to put it on the market. We don't want somebody coming in and immediately just putting some trees in and then getting an allocation and basically selling it back to everybody else. We want to avoid that. Yes?
The term, so I say this correctly, new irrigated lands is free would receive the ag minimum allocation. You would assign them a minimum allocation. That minimum allocation is based on acreage, a flat number per acre. Is that how that number's come up?
We are proposing to come up with a number on a per acre basis.
Okay.
There's been a lot of discussion about basing it on citrus, efficient citrus, but there's other ways to do it. We haven't identified that number.
So you're not tying it to an individual that says, I want to irrigate unirrigated land, and here's my crop type, therefore I need this water.
No, it's going to be one
That
number.
individual is assigned similar to our 1 acre foot minimum floor that we currently have.
It would be one number for all ag.
Okay.
Yeah. Level the playing field. Okay. Basin replenishment. We throw this in here to have a complete proposal. Allocations need to work together with replenishment. Very high level. Right now, we could have an interim program with imported water, of course, subject to its availability. Most users in the basin have the ability, one way or another, to purchase imported water, so replenishment could happen today if it weren't for Met having allocations coming up. But under normal circumstances, there would be some amount of water available, and replenishment could be done that way. Longer term, there's probably less expenses of sources of local water for replenishment. We envision a replenishment fee being levied on groundwater use in the management areas in excess of allocation to fund the replenishment program. Imported water in the longer term would then serve as a backup. We're assuming it'll be more expensive. And I think I briefly mentioned in January, LPUG is pursuing a feasibility study of replenishment projects. This is something that Cayugas is willing to pitch in $125,000 for towards a $250,000 study. And I understand staff has put a placeholder in the draft budget for today to help try and move that along.
Just so I can be clear here, Brian, bullet 2, this proposal is suggesting that the replenishment fee would only be levied on groundwater use in excess of allocation. So if you're using your allocation, you don't pay a replenishment fee?
That's how we're trying to structure it, so that you'd have a base amount of water that you can use, you have rights to use. And
without paying a replenishment fee?
Without paying a replenishment fee. Right. It could work different ways, but that's what we've talked about. Okay, carryover. Getting to the flexibility component. Currently we have a credit program that credits just go on forever, no expiration. We're proposing something that's more constrained and more manageable. We're proposing a rolling average approach. This is what's used in the Santa Paula Basin adjudication. So unused allocation can be available for use in subsequent years for a limited period of time. Our group has talked about 5 to 10 years. I got an example here of 7 years because that's what they use in the Santa Paula Basin. So in the first year, if you don't pump your allocation, you're allowed to carry it over and use it any time in years 2 through 7. That carryover expires at the end of year 7 if you don't use it. And once we have 7 years behind us, then you get in a situation where each year you're having to balance your running average use with your allocation. And there's a couple different ways that could happen. You could get a transfer of allocation from somebody else in the management area, you could purchase imported water in lieu of pumping, or the replenishment fee could be used to keep the basin whole. Water market. Essentially, we're proposing the transferability of allocations within a management area. We're proposing that domestic users would be exempt for that simply from a practical standpoint of not wanting to have a large number of very small transfers taking place in the basin. It's just not something that makes a lot of sense. In fact, in some adjudications, that's not allowed either. Of course, transfers would be subject to GMA approval. We don't want pumping moving from one area to a problem area. That's something we'd want to avoid, so there'd need to be a review and approval process. We're proposing 2 types of transfers, annual transfers that could happen through an exchange, and we're envisioning something very simple, perhaps a GMA website. We're posting of willing buyers and sellers with contact information. A transfer request would be made when a buyer and seller reach an agreement. If the transfer is approved, it would be through a private agreement. The money would exchange hands between the private parties, not go through the GMA. And then there's the question of whether or not to post the price to the website. There's some folks that feel that's important. It sends a signal, market signal, when you have the current price. Others feel, well, you're talking about private agreements, the price should be private. So that's one of those details we haven't really come to full agreement on. But I don't think it's an important detail necessarily. The important part is transferability of allocations to provide flexibility. The second type of transfers would be permanent, and we would propose that those be subject to the same approval, but with the requirement that a deed restriction be put on the title of the property so that any future prospective buyer would be duly noticed that that property has reduced or no allocation. Water systems, I'm not going to get into a lot of detail. You have the issue within a water system where a shareholder or customer may choose to reactivate an old well, drill a new well, and basically cease regular service from the water company. When that happens, we need a mechanism for dealing with the well owner's allocation. In this case, they would get something based on their 5-year, or if that's too low, they would get the minimum allocation like everyone else. And then you need a mechanism for debiting the water system's allocation. We have not arrived at a proposal on how that'll work. That's one of the challenging details that we're still sorting through, but is necessary for a complete proposal. Desalters. There's two types of desalters. There would be desalters that would utilize an existing allocation, treat their water, they have an allocation. There's really nothing else needed for that. That's just sort of a business decision. For projects, for desalter projects that propose new pumping, there would need to be, like any other project, a CEQA process, a review process, and there would need to be an analysis to determine what the impacts are and how those would be mitigated. Groundwater storage, right now, this is essentially the Callegas project. We have an existing approval that we're working under. We propose to continue with that. Any new projects would have to go through a similar process and get an approval, just like any other project. We have a reporting component. Of course, there would be annual reporting of groundwater use. That's what's required under SGMA. There would be annual reports that would deal with all of the things you might imagine: basin conditions, pumping, summary of all the transfers, new allocations issued, desalter status, storage activities, replenishment status, ASR operations, review of the allocation program and replenishment programs, any proposed modifications. 5-year reports would roll up all of that on a 5-year basis and add the yield update and the allocation adjustments for the next fixed allocation period. We're proposing 2 advisory committees to help implement this proposal. We're proposing that LPUG could serve as an advisory committee to your board for implementation and policy issues, so doing things like reviewing and recommending well permits like we have been, allocation transfers, adjustments to allocations, replenishment projects fees. Those are all things that...
Are we going to create a board of directions?
Well, LPUG actually has adopted 3 years ago a charter that lays out what's called a voting panel that provides representation for ag, mutual water companies, Callegas, Waterworks District. So we have a self-created governance structure that could be carried forward, or something else could be proposed.
Is that called a board of directions, or is that just a typo? That's all I'm joking about.
Oh. Typo number 2.
There we go.
That's one of the evil ones that passes spell check.
Yeah. I saw it too, but I didn't want to be the second one to point out.
Okay, the other committee would be a technical advisory committee. Yes.
But backing up the slide, I think the real point though is that one of the keys to making this work is still working through the GMA process.
Yes.
And that's been the mandate, and that's been your direction. And but LPUG would act as an advisory board to the board of directors, because you're going to utilize the board of directors to make sure that the buying and selling of unused allocations is recorded, so we know that there's no games being played on, that there's a permanent place for that record keeping, and all the other things we have to
Yes.
do. There's a watchdog agency that has the authority to do that. Okay.
Yeah, we're not trying to create a separate agency. I mean, the GMA has the regulatory authority. The state has given you the authority. We're trying to work through you to the maximum extent possible and try to come up with something that we think works in our area, which will help you achieve your goals and hopefully achieve the user's goals at the same time. The other committee would be a technical committee. We propose that would be consisting of GMA staff and qualified professionals from the stakeholders. They would deal with issues about questions about basin hydrology, yield. They'd work on the yield determinations and updates every 5 years, tracking and reporting of groundwater conditions. They would probably contribute to the annual and 5-year reports, and of course respond to inquiries about technical matters from LPUG and your board. And I just want to note that these types of committees are very common in adjudicated basin. I know Director Mulhart's familiar with this in the Santa Paula Basin. We're basically following the model of the reporting to the court here and modeling that, except in the case of the court, we would have the GMA board. I'm not going to go into detail. We have kind of laid out at a very high level a transition plan that would potentially allow this system to be put in place as soon as 2017. Obviously, that would require notification, putting folks on notice that the change is coming. We need a year or two to develop some information to provide a basis for establishing some of the things like the minimum allocations and in particular, the idea of tying the landowner's allocation to the land. We need some data to do that. We need the IAI reporting to show where the water use is being used on the land in order to make that linkage. Right now, we don't have a complete picture of that. So we would propose to use a year or two of the IAI reporting to develop that basis for converting the landowner allocations to a land-based system. I'll just kind of skip over the first 10 years. We propose that ramp down, replenished with imported water if available. We want to be studying, planning, and implementing replenishment water projects through the GMA and its authority under the SGMA. In longer term, we would then roll into just having these 5-year periods. Hopefully by then we're implementing replenishment projects and have the basin sustainably managed. So very simply, we're proposing consideration of a few next steps. LPUG has some details to fill in. We propose to work on that this spring. I've been asked by LPUG to recommend, as part of this presentation, at the proper point in time after we have a finalized proposal, that there be consideration for GMA board committee reviews, maybe 1 or 2 committees. We're not sure if it's executive or operations or both. But we'd like that process to start if there is support for the concepts that I presented today. A key part of this is deciding what the management area boundaries are and the yield within those areas. And so we would encourage in your work plan process to prioritize those types of issues because it would be difficult to move forward with implementing a new system as we've laid it out without finalizing definition of the management areas and the yield within those areas. I think that's all I have.
Any members have any questions for Brian? First of all, I thank you for giving this overview, and I'm incredibly encouraged. I am very impressed with the work that the group has done. I think you've looked at all the issues. It's a very complex issue, and you're working your way through it. And I think that what I see is a logical, sequential methodology of looking at what other people have done, thinking outside the box at the appropriate time. And so I encourage you to keep on with what you're doing, because I think the allocation methodology is one component of the full equation. It's like a corporation that says, I want to set a 10% increase in profitability. Okay, that's the goal. Now, how are we going to do that? The sustainable, the sustainability yield is the goal. How are we going to do that? And I think you've broken that down. What I would ask is, what could we do at the GMA to help make sure that between now and the implementation plan, you don't have people making a run on the system to change, to take unirrigated land, for example, and immediately start a clock running that you don't want running? Is there some elements that it would be wise for us to propose a stand-down agreement or some other methodology that locks us into a position in time so that you can get these things done, so that when you implement these procedures, people won't have a run on the bank, if you will,
Sure.
or go back and say, wait a minute, I've been doing this for a year, I have rights, and here we go, play that game. I don't know if that's needed, but if that is something that would be beneficial to the area to get these kinds of things done, I would really encourage you folks to let us look at those and see what we can do to make sure that we control this process so that you have time to get the process done without folks who may not have been a part of all the discussions you've had come out of the woodwork and say, I've got my own personal issues, and we screw the system going down. Does that make sense?
Well, we've actually talked about that, and part of the detail I didn't provide on the transition plan is the idea that emergency ordinancy would continue through that period. And I think emergency ordinancy has the key things we need to prevent those types of things from happening. The moratorium on the wells, that prevents the new land from coming into production. And we need that reporting. I think the elements of what we need are in emergency ordinancy.
Okay, so what I would submit to you then, if the determination is that emergency ordinance E meets those requirements, fine. If in your discussions you find something that, oops, there's a gaping hole in the process, and we can be helpful at the board level to plug that hole while you work through the process, I think that would be helpful, and I think we would be willing to be helpful. We'd have to see what the issue is, but I think it's important that we do something like that to make sure people don't game the system as we run up to the start point.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Sure.
Whenever you're finished.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I did have a couple of questions, and I appreciate that there's some details that you haven't worked out yet. There are some details that when I hear them, I go, I need to explore that a lot more. But you have conceptually at least tried to attack all the major issues with a conceptual solution to those, so it's a significant improvement over the plan that came from LPUG before, and so I congratulate you for that. This concept, to a large extent, sort of relies on the idea that the LPUG basin is independent of other basins. And to what extent is there professional agreement on the degree of isolation of the LPUG? In other words, if LPUG happens to drop lower, does it draw water from other parts of the Fox Canyon Basin or from other basins? To what extent would you characterize the agreement in terms
Well,
of
I think I would say it perhaps a little differently. LPUG recognizes that, in particular, the West Las Posas Basin clearly is in hydraulic communication with the Oxnard Plain. The eastern area, the amount of communication with the Pleasant Valley, we think that's not as significant. So, point one, there's connectivity. Point two, it hasn't been quantified, perhaps to the level of detail it needs to be. So that needs to happen. And the way I would propose to address that is in the yield. So if there is a component of the yield that is derived, let's say for the western area, that is dependent on water from the Oxnard Plain, that is part of the story of seawater intrusion, there needs to be a way to edge match the allocations in the west area with what's happening in the Oxnard Plain. That's a very fuzzy answer to a very complex
Sure.
issue that's going to need.
But it's a recognition that there is a
it is recognized
hydrological
Yes.
connection there. And then replenishment fee only if you go over your allocation. Do the LPUG, do the members of the LPUG users group anticipate that's the kind of replenishment fee we will come up with for the rest of the Fox Canyon, or have you anticipated that?
We're proposing that there be a replenishment program and a replenishment fee structure that's for the Las Posas Basin that would operate differently than perhaps on the Oxnard Plain, and so there could be a fee structure that works with our allocation proposal that might be different. And I wouldn't read too much into the fee only if you're over allocation. That's not something we spend a lot of time talking about. There's typically two components to a replenishment fee. There's sort of a base management fee, sort of the fixed element, and then there's the cost of water and delivering the water. And so we're not saying that everybody would get out from paying that base, whatever that base fee is.
But a separate one,
separate.
and potentially an additional one for a specific to Las Posas.
Yeah. We're trying to give folks a certain amount of water that's as close to free as possible and make a clear distinction with water that is above and beyond their share of the yield that requires some replenishment action to make the basin whole.
Thank you.
Okay, Gene?
Brian, as along with what Chairman Mulhart said, as you go forward with some of these studies that you mentioned, how can we help you with that? What do you need from us by way of funding or assistance?
Well, I think the first thing that's on the horizon is to take a first high-level feasibility study of replenishment water options. And again, that's something I mentioned that Callegas is putting some seed money into. We hope to get a grant to cover the other half of that study. If we don't, we're hoping the GMA could fund that. In either respect, we want the GMA to be very involved in that process. It's going to be your replenishment program, your fees. We're just trying to get the ball rolling and try and figure out what we think might work the best in our area. So financial support for that may become an issue. In terms of the process of working through the details of the allocation, we've started meeting monthly with Gerhardt and Tully. That's been a very good process. That may need to expand. We may need more staff resources as we get into the details. That would be helpful so that we can all come along together and work through the issues, work through concerns that staff may have as we go into some of those detailed issues. And I think those are the primary things at this point.
Dave, you have any questions? Charlie? Steve?
Yeah, one additional question. To what extent are the residents of Moore Park being actively represented at these LPUG meetings? Is it simply through County Waterworks and the representation of the county? But are Moore Park city staff people there?
No.
This certainly has a significant impact on their water supply.
Yeah,
but they're not in attendance outside of the County Waterworks representative.
Right. So they're represented indirectly through their water provider.
Great. Thank you.
We have not reached out to them. LPUG's a pumpers group. That's interesting you bring this up because we actually talked about it at LPUG today about reviewing our charter, and part of the discussion was, are we reaching a broad enough audience? In fact, one of the very specific questions are, should we be engaging an at-large public member on our voting panel that represents the interests of people who don't directly pump water for themselves? So it's very timely, your comment.
Okay. Just as a point of clarification, in your slides, you talked about at some point you'll bring it back to the board. At some point in time, you want to go to committees. And I would encourage you to use all three of the committees. There's a financial component, there's an operational component, there's a policy component, and I think that would be good use of the board's time to divide those questions up so that we're not burying one committee over another. So I encourage you to do that. And again, I affirm that if there is something that is amiss in one of the current regulations, that leaves a gaping hole that we don't want to interfere with the process that you're going through, and you need some relief from that hole, we need to know about it, and then we can go through the public process of seeing if we can take care of that so we don't have some surprise down the road. And is there anybody in the audience that has questions for Brian they'd like to speak to? Sir, yes, you had. I'm sorry, you did. You'll have to come up in your name and...
Paul McDaniel, Strickland Mutual Water. Yeah, good presentation, good thinking there. It seemed to me if someone exceeds their allocation and buys from others, at that point they should also pay the replenishment fee. Just a little detail.
Okay, yeah. So the scenario would be they have their own allocation, but they're also buying water from another. Actually, we're trying to encourage as much of an open market component as possible. So if they're entitled to water because they have shares in a water company, or they're a customer and they've been allotted a certain amount of water from, say, Waterworks 1, I'll go out on a limb and say I don't think LPUC has a problem with that. But they have, it's just simply the case that they have entitlements to groundwater through two different avenues.
Okay. Anybody else have any comments, questions? Jeff, staff, you guys have any questions or comments?
No. A lot of good work. Looking forward to working with you. Just let us know when we can start scheduling the committee meetings and what the agendas will be. We're ready.
Thank you.
Okay. Neil is coming up. And by the way, Neil came in way earlier, and I didn't interrupt you because we're in the presentation as an alternate.
My only comment is I don't know how you do a water market without people knowing what the prices and selling points are.
Okay,
I would add, and Brian should know this, but it's hard to get these committee meetings scheduled, so the earlier the better. Working around, and it's likely we'll be having additional board meetings in the summer months. So, but we'll get to that later.
All vacation has been canceled. We have rooms rented, and if we all stayed at a Holiday Inn Express, I think we could get it solved the next day, at least according to the commercials. Okay, thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
I'd just like to echo Councilmember Andrews' comments about water markets, and I know there's talk about private, but I think this is one of those things that, like many things that deal with sort of utilities, et cetera, it's hard to imagine that we would do this privately when it's such a public,
we'll bring that
public knowledge.
Feedback back to the committee.
Yeah, okay. All right, very good. Let's go to receive and file.
Move to receive and file.
Any objection? So ordered. Let's go to item number 4. Kathleen.
Good afternoon, Chairman Mulhart and directors. For the record, my name is Kathleen Rydell. I'm here to present item 4, the 2014 Agency Annual Basin Management Objectives Report Cards. The Groundwater Management Plans establishes the basin management objectives. There are 52 objectives. The objectives involve both, in some cases, water levels and water qualities at selected locations, or 2 water qualities associated with the location. There are 52 basin management objectives. Those are collected at 26 well sites. Of those well sites, 9 are at 4 nested well locations, and those are generally in the Oxnard Plain and the coastal regions. So going over it, the BMOs are established by the Groundwater Management Plan. They identify it by state well number, and it also states what, whether it's a water level or which particular water quality is collected at the well locations. The BMOs provide a snapshot of the health of the basin at the particular time of year that it's collected. And in this case, today we're doing 2014. On our BMO report cards, it produces average over that year, water levels or water quality. The data is averaged. The goals for the Groundwater Management Plan in establishing these basin management objectives is tied to protecting water quality for beneficial uses. Those include prevent saline intrusion that is tied to the water level BMOs. And then among those on the water quality would protect the public water supplies for nitrates. Stepping back and looking at what are the greatest exceedances that we experienced in 2014, just looking at this. For water levels, those are collected in both the Oxnard Plain and the Pleasant Valley basins. So we have 93 feet that the water levels were below the BMO, and that PTP1 is in the Oxnard Plain, and the PV number 10 is in the Pleasant Valley Basin. Chlorides, those are wells that are located in the coastal region, Port Hueneme, Port Magoo area. So you see the exceedances there in chlorides. Nitrates are Arroyo Santa Rosa Basin. And it should be noted that it exceeded it by 45 milligrams per liter. So the BMO for that is 45 milligrams per liter. That's the maximum contaminant level for drinking water. So it is, 45 for the BMO, and then an additional 45. It's at a level of 90 milligrams per liter at the time it was tested in the Arroyo Santa Rosa Basin. And then finally, TDS. And that is a water quality sample that was collected in the East Las Posas Basin, so that's an average actually. And TDS is related to the Regional Water Quality Control Board's basin plan objectives. So going over our BMO report cards. First, at the top of the BMO report card is the basin and the year. It provides the goal. And I should state, in your packet you have black and white copies that were bound into the packet, but you have been provided with color copies. And then there were color copies available for the audience also. And then the basin management objectives for that particular basin. And then status summary, and this reflects what is presented in the summary table, so it sort of provides a description of what's in the summary table. And go on to show you the map locations where the basin management objective wells are located. And so this is for the forebay, and you can see that there are 2 wells located at approximately those locations in the forebay basin. And I'd like to take a moment of your time here. With a pen, I found 2 errors in my basin management objective report card.
Self-disclosure is better than being caught. Okay.
Okay, if you go to page 1, the staff report is correct.
That, by the way, is an FAA policy. I'm just repeating what
the staff report is correct, and my summary status table is correct. However, in the status summary and the written description on page 1, it says in the first line, I'd like you to delete the end of that line. It says, and below the BMO. Please delete below the BMO. Actually, both of those are above the BMO, so they both failed. And then if we go to page 2, please insert between were met, its water levels, BMOs, they were not met. None of them were met for the water levels. So please insert not. And so those are the 2 changes. And if we want to go with typos, it's on page 6. Available in the second line is misspelled. We'd like to correct that. So if you want to circle that, we'd like to get that corrected. So with that being said, those are the errors disclosed. So in our BMO report card, we have it color-coded. If the dot is red, that's sort of a signal. It says that it is not meeting the basin management objective. If it is yellow, that means caution, it's close to not meeting, or it is still meeting, but it's really close to not meeting the basin management objective. We have arrows on the 5-year trends. Red means that it's it's deteriorating. Green means it's improving. And the arrows sideways mean that it's sort of a push. It's just stable. So going on, The plots, time series plots, are available on the website. We didn't provide it in this board letter. And when we talk about the 5-year trends, I've just placed some lines here. You can see that the trend is upward here. And in this case, it is TDS, and it is also nitrates, and so that's not positive. That's showing it's deteriorating. Just to show you an example of a downward trend, here you have that it's going down. These are water levels. And on chlorides, you can see that this is sort of a push, so we don't have a clear up-down trend. And one other example is one of them, this is a Pleasant Valley, where in the 5 years it was going up and down, and there's no clear trend, and so therefore it's within the range of fluctuations. So we
Sir?
have no clear trend.
Rick. I can't have him interrupting this because I can hear it all the way up here. Okay.
Your mic's on.
Yeah. Sir, I can't have you doing this because you're interrupting this process here. Thank you. Okay.
So that's a background on the 5-year trends, and going by basin on the status. For the Oxnard Plain forebay, the BMOs for nitrate are not being met at either of the locations. With regard to total dissolved solids, it's marginal on the westward location, but it is not being met on the eastward location. With regard to the 5-year trends, nitrates are increasing and total dissolved solids are increasing. Moving over to the Oxnard Plain Basin, none of the water level BMOs are being met in the upper aquifer system. Chlorides are being met in 3 of the wells, at 3 of the locations, and then it's not being met at 3 of the locations. I have included the milligrams per liter of chloride that was in the samples that were collected at these 2 wells. The specific information is provided on the BMO report card. 5-year trends, water levels are going down. Chlorides are sort of a push. They're staying rather stable. And in the lower aquifer system, water levels, none of the water level BMOs are being met. Chlorides, 2 of the BMOs are being met, and at these locations they are not being met. With regard to the 5-year trends, water levels are going down, chlorides are staying fairly stable. Pleasant Valley Basin, water level BMOs are not being met. Chlorides are being met. And with regard to the 5-year trend, water levels are declining and chlorides are staying fairly stable, or there's no determined up-down trend. And these are on average. For the Arroyo Santa Rosa Basin, the nitrate BMO is not being met at the western location. It is marginal and really close to the BMO in the eastern location. Chloride BMOs are not being met. And with regard to the 5-year trends, chlorides are increasing. And then for nitrates, right here, the nitrates are increasing in this particular well, and they are decreasing in that well. So for the Las Posas basins, chloride BMOs, this is the well in the South Las Posas Basin. It's marginal. In the East Las Posas Basin, it is marginal. I want to mention, in the basin, in the groundwater management plan, the BMO wells are specified. However, one of these 2 wells, I forget, this one has been destroyed, the original one, which is E01. So we picked for this year an alternate location, a temporary location for collecting basin management objective data. It's about 300 feet south of the original well. So E02, we have supplemented the information with information from that well. The original well that the BMO information was collected from has been abandoned for a number of years. So to supplement the data, to not have a large data gap, we selected a well that was nearby. It happens to be, I think, about 900 feet south of the original well. And so that data was put in there as a temporary replacement while those wells are not available. One of the wells in the West Las Posas is not available. It was not sampled in 2014, and that's because the well was down, and Waterworks is working on getting the well up and running again. And that's just a reminder, the whole basin management objective program is based dependent upon receiving information from other agencies. We don't do our own sampling, and we don't do our own water level measuring, and so it's getting the data from other agencies, and we're dependent on them for the data. So chlorides are being met in the West Las Posas and not being met in the southwest corner of the East Las Posas Basin.
Okay.
Total dissolved solids being met in the South Las Posas Basin and not being met in the East Las Posas Basin, and in the well in the West Las Posas it is being met, and once again that one we have no information for. 5-year trends: South Las Posas chlorides are actually going down, total dissolved solids are staying stable. In the East Las Posas both the chlorides and total dissolved solids are increasing. In the West Las Posas, chlorides are stable and total dissolved solids are increasing. So in summary, looking back over the years worth of 2010 to 2014, looking at 2014, 35 of the BMOs were not met. That's approximately 67% of the BMOs. Approximately 27% are being met, and then 2, that is that one well, 2 per well, so it's 4% of the data is not available.
Okay.
And are there any questions? BMOs are also linked to item 6 today. It is one of those issues of concern, and it is one of those that were ranked very high priority. So,
Okay.
just
Anybody? Yeah.
Kathleen, I may have missed it, but on the, was there a water level BMO for the Las Posas and Santa Rosa basins?
no, there's only 2, and in those, the Arroyo Santa Rosa and the Las Posas Basin, they are both water quality objectives. I know in the basin-specific groundwater management plan proposed for by the LPUG group, they are suggesting more BMOs, and they are locations, as well as looking at water levels, looking at water quality, and increasing the number of objectives that they're looking at. So that's one of those being addressed, say, in item 6.
Okay. All right. Anybody else have any questions? It's not a question to you. It's a question or a comment back to LPUG and Brian and the guys folks that are here. Is that it's important, I think. It'll be important on the Oxnard Plain as well. It's going to be important in your area. That as we go through the sustainability is both in quantity and quality, and there needs to be, make sure that we address the quality issue. How you do that, and the water levels may be up, but the quality's going down. How are we going to address that in the allocation scheme? I have no idea, but I think that's going to have to be looked at as well, because it is a 2-component equation, both quantity and quality, and that's what this addresses right now. So, and just an editorial. Okay, anybody in the audience, questions for Kathleen? Okay.
Move to receive and file.
All right.
Second.
Motion and a second. Do you have a question? No.
No, I have a comment I'd like to make about the LPUG
Okay.
before we go to the next agenda.
All right, a motion and a second. Any objection? Oh, we have to vote on it. It's an action item. Roll call.
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Director Craven?
Yes.
Director Bennett?
Yes.
Director West?
Yes.
Director Borchert?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
I appreciate the LPUG report, and I know that they said they were going to try to finalize in spring of 2015 and then bring stuff to us in the summer. As they're finalizing, I didn't want to raise this late, but I was just looking at this and trying to analyze. I certainly would like to question the issue of whether the citizens of Moore Park, in terms of their drinking water, should they have a minimum allocation also? Because the way I'm reading it, they're the only ones that would have cuts continue without any minimum allocation. I don't have the answer. I don't know what I think, but I think it's a question that I'll be raising, and I just, in fairness, wanted to wanted to raise that to you in advance as you're getting ready to try to finalize your details and stuff. I'd love to hear more discussion about that.
Okay. What I'm going to do is, come on up. Yeah, just for the record, we've closed this issue, but I think the questions that we both raised are valid because we're trying to solve this problem. So I'll go ahead and recognize you on this issue.
Yeah, this is Dave Sasek from the Waterworks Districts. With regards to the allocation, it may not have been clear in the presentation, but the overall basin pool will be subdivided, and so each Waterworks district will get a set percentage. So as the pie gets bigger and smaller, our percentage will adjust with that. So there's the floor is our percentage as opposed to a allocation amount, and within each pool, for the pumpers, each pumper is going to have a floor that'll be adjusted, but our percentage is what we're agreeing to. And that percentage is effectively our floor. I'm not sure if that's clear. I can come see you offline.
But it's not a minimum. It's not a floor because it can keep going down.
And everyone else can keep going down as well.
No, some people have a minimum.
But if the basin goes down, that minimum will go down as well.
True, but certainly it's different. It's different when you have a minimum.
Brian,
this is probably a more detailed conversation.
Brian, I'm not going to open up again. Obviously, a question was raised. Communicating through staff and staff to Steve will answer his questions. He's raised an issue. You've heard the issue. Obviously, it'll come up again, so you need to sort through it. But so let's just let that presentation stay where it is. Okay, you all right with that, Steve? Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's go to item 5.
Good afternoon, Chair Mulhart and directors. For the record, my name is Rick Viergoots. I'll be presenting item number 5 today, which is the results of the pilot program for well inspections in the Las Posas Basin. I have a relatively short presentation. Much of this is background. In 2013, the agency determined it would move forward with consultant services for a well inspection program, and it did that. It contracted with M&S Engineers in February. The work was to be completed, the field inspections were to be completed by September. Contract had 2 main tasks, and I'll show you a chart in a minute. But the first task was looking at wells that were registered within the GMA, 245 of them. So these are the wells that we expect to be reported every 6 months, or now every 5 and 7 if they're an agricultural user. So that's that first group of the 245. And also 20 wells that weren't registered in the GMA, but that the county understood to be active wells. So these are unregistered wells, understood to be operating. And then the third task was a field inspection of 43 wells which weren't registered in the GMA, and the county understood them to be abandoned or non-compliant. So people generally understand what an abandoned well is. A non-compliant well has an additional label to it by the county. The county would send out what they called annual usage statements every year. They send these out county-wide, and they'll be sending them out again soon, and they ask people, are you using your well or not? If there's no response to that request for information, these get listed as a non-compliant. That's all that is. They may be abandoned wells, but the county isn't sure. Okay. So leading up to the inspection program, the GMA conducted outreach. We sent letters out to well owners and operators. We told them, here's what it is. It's a well inspection program. Here's the consultant that's going to be contacting you. Alternatively, you can contact them and set up an appointment. We also mentioned it in the newsletter. The consultant's role was to contact the well owners and operators, arrange for an inspection, go out there, document it, look at flow meter information, take limited photographs, use a handheld global positioning system unit to get the coordinates of the well, and provide reports. The consultant was to make reasonable efforts to arrange for the inspections. If the well operator or owner refused the inspection. The consultant was just to make a note of it and move on. Other inspections were hampered because people just wouldn't respond one way or another. So we had some that refused, a limited number that refused, but the majority just didn't respond to the requests. And in other cases, contact information was limited just to mailing addresses. And that's for these unregistered wells that I talked about earlier. So as I said in the opening slide, this 245, this was the task 2, okay? 245 of these wells that are normally reported to the GMA were to be inspected. 217 were. There were some additional wells, meters, extra meters on wells that were counted within this. 33 people were not responsive to the request, and 8 said, no thank you, I don't want you to come out and look. Of these 20 wells that were active in the county, 10 were looked at, 10 were not. And for the abandoned and non-compliant wells, there were a total of 43. 12 inspections were made, 31 were not made. Now, on to some of the technical detail. There's a wealth of technical detail that was collected. The staff report summarizes the key points. We looked at flow meter serial numbers. We found that in 25 cases they didn't match the agency's records. So that may indicate that they replaced the meter without filing the necessary paperwork with the GMA. It could be an interim flow meter that was used. We don't know. So we're corresponding with the well operators to determine what that flow meter's role is. Is it the new permanent meter, or was it an interim type approach? Multipliers and divisors, there's some discussion in the staff report about this. 21 meter multipliers did not match the agency records, and I'm going to show you a graphic here in a minute. But with the flow meter readings, for flow meters that don't already report in acre feet, the reading has to be converted to acre feet. And so to do that, it has to be multiplied by a factor and sometimes and then divided by a factor to make it equal acre feet. And so the agency forms are set up to do this. How? The meter reading, so the actual reading from the meter, the odometer, if you will, on the meter, the wheels that turn, is multiplied and then divided to compute acre feet. It's done on the agency's form. It's also done in the online system, and the training video you saw today showed how that worked. Also, when the statement is sent to the well operator, the previous meter reading is pre-printed on the form. That's how we know what the difference is they put the current and then they'll have the previous. So here's how the current forms are set up to compute the acre feet. And just real quick, this was on the video, but it has a state well number. It'll have a meter serial number. That gets input into the system as part of the meter calibration program or other events that occur with the life of a flow meter. Maybe it stops working, maybe it's repaired. Either way, information is supposed to flow into the GMA with this. Meter readings are put in here. The difference is computed. It's multiplied. In this case, the multiplier is 100. It's divided. In this case, there's no divisor. It reads in acre feet. And the extraction is reported. What we found looking through it is we saw this, where instead of the multiplier of 100, we had a multiplier of 1. But the well operator was multiplying these numbers by 100 instead. So the result is the same, but it doesn't match the information that we collected with the well inspection program. It doesn't match the information that we know is associated with the meter. So the causes of that are multiple. Errors are what we want to really key in on, and errors can be introduced with this type of system, especially if somebody else is conducting the self-reporting. You can imagine a case here if somebody reports this differently, if they don't multiply this by 100 and they multiply it by 1, their value would be off by 100. So these are potentially important issues. The importance really rises when you have different people reading the meters, and that can happen. Sometimes we get requests to modify that multiplier, but we don't honor those requests unless the person can show that that's actually how the meter reads. There are a number of reasons for that, some of which I've talked about. And in the JPA video today, you saw a video where it said, enter the reading just as it is on the flow meter. Don't enter decimal points. That's one of the causes of errors, is when these multipliers don't match up with the meter reading, we get errors. On verification of flow meter readings, we actually looked at all the flow meter readings collected by M&S. We cross-checked them against the photographs that M&S took of the meters to make sure that the readings were correct. And we compared them to the subsequent meter readings that were provided by the well operator. We found quite a few that were very different. We went through and we filtered out a number of those which appear to be related to meter rollovers or meter replacements. And we found some where the subsequent meter reading was lower than what M&S collected, 9 instances of those. Those might be under-reporting violations, and so we'll be looking into those more carefully and advising your board on this as we learn more.
Okay,
regarding the field verification of data.
Okay, Rick, I'm going to move us along here for a second because we got another big issue that we're going to get into. The staff report, if what I say is not true, the members will tell me. I assume the staff, they've read the staff report, they've seen what you've put up here, and what you're asking for is feedback on where we go in the future. And we did this pilot program as there was a lengthy discussion with the folks up in the LPUG area about how to go about this process, boots on the ground and all that kind of stuff. And we let this contract out. We had a bid process, and we've now got our first cut at it, and we're seeing that we have some errors that are mechanical. We have some non-compliance issues. You've summarized that in your lessons learned, the verification of the well coordinates, and the lack of response. So let me go to the directors, if I may, and what do you folks want to do as direction to staff? And they have talked about, do we expand it to other areas? So the discussion is open. Yes, ma'am.
I'm in favor of continuing it. It says with some changes, and I don't have a problem with that. I do have a question. Under a law that was passed last year, we now have the ability to go on property. Is that correct? So people can't tell us no?
Well, using correct procedures, we did.
Yes.
Okay. Others? Steve?
The way I read the recommendation and the conclusions, it says, we recommend the data collection and data management methods used in the pilot program not be used again, as the utilization of a real-time data collection system would be significantly more efficient. Compliance with the pilot program was problematic by several well operators, even through information sharing or access of inspection. So I have a tendency to agree, looking at the data, that this isn't a good use. We've learned enough to know that we have problems if we try to do our verification this way. And I would consider different, better well inspection programs for the future. So that'd be my direction based on this recommendation in the conclusion and the data that we have here.
Dave?
I don't know if I read that same interpretation. I see that there was a problem with using handheld GPS devices and so having real-time equipment in the field to verify some of those things might alleviate some of that extra work that it seems that happened. But it also seems to me that a lot of good information was gleaned from the process, and it kind of falls in line with concepts we've discussed before about auditing self-reports. It solves that question that's always raised: is it a good idea that our meter data is self-reported? And one concept for verifying that would be that we have audits, random audits. I kind of like that concept. Particularly, I like the concept we've discussed before about folks who continue to be non-compliant of forcing them to pay for automatic meter. Those seem to be very good ideas about getting more solid data. To go off on a tangent with AMRs, and we've had a lot of discussion about that, but I think we ought to be careful going down that road, because we end up getting into a whole maintenance and staffing issue to make that happen. And the maintenance of those devices, and we perhaps begin to need to have a staff of people and trucks, and maybe we're not prepared to do that. It seems like we have a lot of bigger issues on the table, and particularly determining safe yields of basins. So I would propose that we would maybe modify this to be kind of a more full-time auditing program, a boots-on-the-ground person like we've talked about before. And if perhaps we have additional powers to access properties in whatever fashion it is, that's perhaps a good thing. It backstops the information we get. Clearly, it corrected a lot of meter issues and things that we didn't know about. One way or the other, we're going to have somebody on the ground doing it, and to do it in a broad-brushed approach with everybody having an automatic meter and staff to maintain and keep an eye on all those meters and all that. I'm not sure we're ready for that.
Gene?
Actually, I like the idea of periodic random audits, but beyond that, Rick, is there a plan for dealing with some of the folks that have been consistently non-compliant, both with reporting as well as inspections, and any of the, I guess, those instances where under-reporting is verified?
Right now, the plan for those where we're still doing fact-finding for those what appear to be under-reporting issues. The plan with those is if it is verified as under-reporting, then we'll follow the GMA's process. There'd be notices of violation sent, and that would be a first for us to tackle that particular type of issue. And so right now that's the plan. I don't know exactly what the notice of violation would say or what type of penalties they might be assessed.
For Board Member West, there was a time when we were sort of laissez-faire about going after, and we tried several letters, we'd certify it, we did. Your board has tightened that down, so we have a guidance from your board on how to go after these people in a more timely fashion. But we could bring that back to you in case you wanted to ratchet it up another step.
No, I was just curious if there was a process. I don't, not inviting anything. I just wanted to know.
Al, since the question of what our authority is, we got a specific change to our enabling legislation that was enacted, passed last year, effective this year, plus the GSA has come on board with this issue. Has our ability to force compliance increased significantly, or is it still complicated because we have to go through a court proceeding?
Well, the ability to enforce compliance has not changed. What has changed is the agency has increased authority to inspect, to determine whether or not the operator is in compliance. So the question of what should we do about the non-reporters or the under-reporters, that program, as I understand it, is already in place. The new legislation, the new authority would go to the category of operators who were contacted and either refused the inspection or just didn't respond, which I think could reasonably be construed as a refusal to allow inspection. And in those cases, your board now, or the agency now, has the authority to seek a court order to allow access to do its own determination of whether the operator is in compliance.
We have a group. Is that a one-on-one basis we have to go to the court, or can we do it as a group to say to the court, this group has, and therefore to minimize our time and energy in this process?
Well, the court order would have to be specific to each property to allow access. You could, I suppose, do a group filing and seek an order as to more than one property. So, but I'm not sure which would be the more efficient, a single filing for each operator or a mass filing. I'd have to look at that, but okay. Either approach could work.
So the question is, we have some tools in place. Mm-hmm. There are some questions in terms of how you want to go through the filing process if you go down that road. The question before the board I would submit then is, do we expedite this process that we now have authority to do? And if we don't know what's going on out in the field, and we're having the LPUG group work very hard to come up with an allocation methodology and to come up with a sustainable yield in their area, and we have holes in it because we don't know what people are pumping. And so what do you guys want to do, folks want to do?
Well, I think we need to continue in some manner.
Okay.
It seems to me that we have agreement that we need to know what's going on. That, we have to have confidence that we're getting the proper data. And it's probably just a disagreement about what's the best way to do that. Go with meters like people do for other utility meters, like your water meter at home, your gas, your electric, or go with some kind of audit. That's okay. I think it comes down to that fundamental decision. But it's good that we at least are in agreement that we need to have good data.
Dave?
I have another question for Al. By accepting GSA status, this agency, we aren't really effectively a GSA until we've completed a approved groundwater sustainable management plan, correct? So the reason for the question is, do we truly have these new powers now or not?
Well, two things. The GMA Act was amended last year to specifically allow this agency to seek authority to enter. A similar authority was granted through the groundwater legislation, but both would require the same court approval before we could do entry without permission from the property owner.
But regarding the new powers granted to a GSA,
those are already in effect, and the reason is that could be part of the investigation that the agency needs to undertake in order to develop its sustainability plan. So that authority under the new legislation, the Groundwater Management Act, is already in place.
Okay. Gene?
I agree with Director Bennett. We need the data. We need accurate data. What's the least intrusive way of obtaining that data and doing it cost efficiently? I know there are problems with AMR systems when you have different types of meters that you're trying to organize on a single system. That becomes something of a technical challenge. And I don't know if we need to go that route for the whole system if we have a 5% or even a 10% non-compliance rate. Let's concentrate on obtaining compliance, with a gloved fist at first and something more if necessary. But it seems like we're getting good data from 90% or more of the system, and we just need to enforce compliance elsewhere.
How about if we do this? We have a protocol, you addressed it, and Al has said we have both our own legislative authority under our Enabling Act, plus under the GSA Act. What I would ask that staff come back to us next month with the action plan to that may or may not include going to the court, what's the sequence of events, and how you're going to go about doing that. Dave raised a valid question, and it may be that if we want to expand this to other areas, that what is the possibility with this new capability that we in fact have the ability to do a random analysis, a statistical based kind of random analysis, which is used in all kinds of samplings, and give us some ideas on how that might play out so we can actually expand the limited dollars we have to include a broader base by doing a random sample and make it a policy that each year we're going to do a random sample of X percentage, and that could be a solution. It'll be a good debate on that. Everybody okay with that as direction? Anybody want to change that?
I'm okay with that, Chair. I would hate to tie up staff with an issue that I think really in the broader scope of things we need to do, we've got much bigger fish to fry.
And I agree with you. That's why I'm concerned about if we do another area at a quote unquote 100%, these non-compliant issues become a burden for us and not the consultant that we retained. The actual analysis of going out in the field was purely a bid contract that we had, and an individual did it, and we now know that it got good data in some areas, missing data in other areas, non-compliance in other areas. Those areas where it's non-compliance and missing data becomes our problem, and I don't want to make that a huge burden for us.
Might I suggest we table the idea of establishing a permanent audit program and instead ask staff to come back? I suspect that some of these non-compliant folks are recalcitrant non-compliance. They're constantly non-compliant. Maybe there are other options we can pursue in terms of bringing the stragglers into the fold.
Okay, I'm okay with that. I think you need to come back to us with some direction on how we're going to solve this particular problem before we expand it to the next phase, if that's where we go.
By this particular problem, you're talking about the non-responders and the non...
Yeah, okay, yeah, to get all this data. As a sidebar, again speaking to the LPUG area, somehow when we finally get the sustainability plan in place and we have a protocol in place, we're now seeing that, as you folks that have sat through these meetings, we've had difficulty getting meter reading calibrations. It's been an ongoing problem for us. We've spent gobs of time on that issue. We're going to spend gobs of time on this issue. Somehow, some way, I don't know how you do it, but somehow, some way, as you write the protocol for how you're going to do the allocation and the sustainability within your area, you need to tackle this issue as well, because we're going to have to tackle this someplace else, and maybe it's an issue that we're going to have to address. How do we get compliance so we have valid data so that the folks that are playing the game correctly are not being penalized by a high percentage of folks that aren't reporting?
Right.
And we're going to have it across our agency, and we have seen historically it took us a long time to get, I thought, a fair meter reading program in place and get people to comply with that. And we're going to have the same problem in this area and comply with that. And so it's something else to add to your agenda when you do this work. Okay? All right? Everybody okay with the direction to staff then, as modified by Dave? Right? Okay. That's the direction to staff. Can I have a motion on that, please?
I will make that motion.
Okay, roll call.
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Director Craven?
Yes.
Director Bennett?
Yes.
Director West?
Yes.
Director Borchard?
Yes.
Okay, let's go to item number 6.
Good afternoon, Chair Mulhart, directors. Mr. Pratt, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Tully Clifford with Ventura County Public Works Agency. I'm the director of the Watershed Protection District. Gerhard will actually be presenting this item. I just wanted to provide a little context before he started. It is a rather daunting-looking item on the face of it. What it actually is we're trying to converge our current work plan along with the issues that you've been working on over the past few months, and then the requirements of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. This is attempting to capture all of that. And at this stage, we're trying to capture all of that. I directed staff to look at all the activities and tasks they felt would be required in all those areas, gather them together, sort of cherry-pick some solutions that we've heard are acceptable to stakeholders or have been suggested, do an estimate of what it would cost from a time, schedule, consultants, other processes perspective, and roll it all into this document so that you would have it all together in one great big pie. I'm not looking for you to approve that. What we're actually looking for is for you to take a look through all of those. Here's what Gerhard has to say, and let us know what are the key activities in addition to our routine operations of assisting you in running the agency. What are the ones that you really want us to focus on? We will then come back with a better estimate of that from the time, from a schedule, activity, process perspective, and let you know then what requires to achieve that. We recognize it would be very difficult to undertake absolutely all of this in here, if not impossible. And so we would really appreciate you focusing on what you feel are the key items.
Tully, let me make sure I understand the context. You said you're not asking us to approve this. I assume you want us to understand this, and nothing that we do here will be licensed to staff to do anything in here. Is that correct?
What we're looking...
Because there's no right answer to that question. If the answer is yes, what's the point?
Yeah,
if the answer is no, you've got to tell me exactly what license you want.
What we're looking for is direction as to how we can formulate the work plan to make sure that it's manageable and achieves your key goals. And so we anticipate that will probably be 3 or 4 items off of your issues priority list, which will then dovetail with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act requirements, and we can then tie it into the work plan. But what we wanted you to see is there's a huge range of activities out there right now that you've said are important.
So the question... I'd like to take a shot at Board Member West's question. So we've got 3 pieces of work out there. One started long before SGMA was passed, and it's a very structured approach that we followed per your board guidelines through several steps. It represents a ton of work. Not all of it.
By the way, we disagree with respect to the value and structure of this work. My perspective is it's pointless. It's a year-long glimpse into the obvious, and it's absolutely worthless. It doesn't move us an inch closer to development of a sustainable groundwater management plan. I think the recommendations are...
So thank you very much for that. Now I'll finish. So we got this, and it's per your board's direction. We got a work plan, and we have to develop in a budget that has to be to you by June, right? That's the second piece of work. And then we've got...
But does the budget presume the recommendations in here?
Some of it, because your board has given that direction. So your board can undirect it today if you so desire. And that's the point of my comments. The second piece of the overlay is SGMA. SGMA's happened. Your board has adopted to be a GSA. Now, it doesn't take a 16-pound brain, to borrow a term, to figure out that we need to get to work on the groundwater sustainability plan. So your board might direct us to say, focus your efforts in this regard. That's what we expect to hear from you today. So we're not dealing with 3 disparate pieces of a constellation of 3 issues. We need to focus. We don't disagree on that point.
Okay,
you're right. I think, Gene, I think one of the key things that Jeff said was, when Steve and I recommended that we go down this process, we had no idea that they were going to give us a sustainability plan. In fact, our plan was, prior to the first of the year, go to Sacramento and ask for authority to do basically a lot of what the sustainability plan gave. So this particular work document was kind of a way of getting our hands around all the issues that we keep hearing coming up and over. And I think what Jeff is asking for, and I think what staff is asking for is, okay, We have a sustainability plan. That sustainability plan needs to be the focus of where we need to go. It is the objective. Our objective is to create a sustainability plan. There are some requirements. That sustainability plan, we have heard folks want to do it on a basin by basin basis.
I think that's what the law requires.
What it requires, yes. Okay, so we're gonna do that. There is a cost component in doing that. There is a mechanical process in doing that. And what staff has indicated is, okay, we have a protocol that, in fact, has looked at all the elements it's going to take to answer some of these questions, but we can't answer them all. What questions out of that protocol would be valuable to move the ball down the road in the front end to get to sustainability plan as quickly as we can, because it is, in fact, the goal line. That's what we have to get to. And so I think what we need to do is hear what they have to say, and obviously we can interrupt wherever we need to go and then control the conversation. My vision would be is that this board should give staff, at the end of this exercise, this board should be at the 30,000, 40,000 foot level. It needs to give staff very clear direction. The sustainability plan is your target. To get to your target, these first three elements need to be addressed and put on fast track to get there. And the basis for pulling that information out will come from the work that we've done, because this work, in fact, all of this work that we've done in this, it's in here someplace, all of this work that we've done has focused on those elements. So
one more clarifying comment for Board Member West, just to move on. This was developed in the context of demand-only authority. All the way through, it was demand-only. Since you've been on the board, we have had, through the GSA election, supply side. So it may make this document look somewhat irrelevant, but there are still parts of this that are applicable on the demand side, I think. So that context might help your discussion after you see the presentation.
So again, I want to focus on what our objective is. Our objective is to somehow agree, or not agree, I don't know what the answer is going to be, that the sustainability plan should be our target, give clear direction to staff on what elements are needed to push that ball down the road, and come back to us next month with a action plan on how they're going to do that, and begin harmonizing all these tools that we have out there. Some may be valuable, some may not be valuable, to effectively meet our final objective, and that final objective is the sustainability plan. That to me is where I think what we're going to try to do today. So with that, if I may. All right, so let's try to go through it as quick as you can, because I think there's going to be a lot of discussion on it. And
I'll certainly move through it.
If I can, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just think, since we're on the point, and I don't think you want me to come back to this point after they finish this, because I'd rather focus on that, but I appreciate Director West, and I don't expect that my comments are going to change your opinion about the value of what we went through, but for the benefit of everybody that did go through it, and for the benefit of those of us that were there and went this way, I would like to say this, and that is, we have incredibly hard decisions that we're going to have to make. They're going to have a significant impact on people. We developed this concept after we tried to make some incredibly hard decisions in here to implement Ordinance E, which was incredibly hard. And the one thing we heard overwhelmingly, over and over again from everybody was, you're moving too fast, you haven't given us a chance to offer other alternative solutions. You haven't given us a chance to analyze the unintended impacts of this action. Right? And so as we move forward now, and hopefully we will eventually make the hard decisions that are good for everybody, we will have a better chance of being able to address that process question by saying we put every potential solution that we could out there and gave everybody a chance to shoot at it one way or the other. And you may feel like that is the obvious, but when you are there with only one solution in front of you and you don't have all the other solutions and a chance for people to have given their best shot at those solutions, you almost can't keep your eye focused on the solution that you're trying to focus on because you're constantly getting pulled. If this has done nothing else, it will allow us to say, we had a nice opportunity for everybody to do that, and now we have, for better or for worse, we've decided to go this direction. Now, that all happened at the same time then the GSAs came forward. I believe it actually had more value than that, in that I think some genuine creative solutions came in here, or some solutions that weren't on everybody's radar screen. And if nothing else, even to whatever extent everybody else can get, our staff has, I think, become much more knowledgeable about the potential solutions and the advantages and disadvantages, so they're able to give us better advice. And so I offer that as a defense of, not a defense, but as an explanation of even why I believe it had some merit, whether it had as much merit as you would like it to have had, or whether it is, in your opinion, had no merit. I certainly would disagree that it had no merit in light of where we were at the time that we asked for this. So I'll
Thank
pass
you,
that on
Stephen.
to you.
And I understand that objective. I don't think this is the right process, and I don't think this product moves you anywhere closer to achieving that objective.
And hopefully we'll be able to actually have it help, right? But we'll see. Right.
Okay. Gerhard.
All right. Thank you, Jeff Tully, for the introduction and remarks from the board. Gerhard Hubner. I'll be giving this presentation. I'll try to move quickly through it. There is a lot here. There are a lot of pieces, as you heard. There was a number of things that came together in the last year and a half. We have an opportunity to set some short and long-term goals with what I'm calling a roadmap for managing groundwater within our jurisdiction. So 3 things to consider. Tully alluded to them, and I'm going to repeat them at the end. So as you hear the presentation, we're going to be talking about activities that you're going to hopefully direct us to embark on in the next year or two, and will carry us forth to the next 5, the schedule, and then financing. How are we going to accomplish it? So we know about SIGMA. We know the governor signed it. It's law. As you know, this board in January formally elected to become the GSA. And within the law, there are certain things that have to occur. The Holy Grail, or the thing that we've been talking about, is the groundwater sustainability plan. That has to be done by 2020. So that's our outer marker. There's also going to be some interim things that the agency is going to have to react to, either the new draft regs, Bulletin 118, and the basin boundaries. We just had a discussion about the long-term issues process. That went, it's been a year now, 12 months, step by step. And the direction at the March meeting was to return with recommended steps and moving it forward. Roadmap for convergence of the agency's processes. That's what we're here today for. If you recall, within there, at one point, there was a budget plan that was supposed to accomplish that. We've purposely waited to the conclusion of that process because that will assist us, what you see today, in terms of the proposal. This is just a simple graphic, 3 processes, 3 that I mentioned. Ultimately, our goal is sustainable groundwater management. So, first step. We looked at the document. We looked at what the board looked at the March meeting, and we took it the next step. Within it, as you've acknowledged, there's a lot of solutions. We needed to take it the next step and identify a preferred solution. We didn't do this in isolation. We did this. We met several times. We considered previous letters, other management plans, and including our 2007 management plan. So, straw man, we've put forth an identified solution, considering all the different factors, resource protection, the mission and goal of the agency, and any previous policy discussions that we could capture within those preferred items. We used the colors yellow and green. Yellow is the identified preferred. If there was multiple within it, in a combination, you'll see green and yellow used together. So this is essentially the graphic that everybody has as part of their board package. This is the actual page, and you can see in yellow, this is really just the first A1 from the list of identified solutions. So we had that process. We took that first, and that was the first step. Oops. Second step. So we looked at how do we get to our groundwater sustainability plan, the implementation and the plan development timelines. So we created two graphics for you. You will see them. This is the, I'll just hold it up. This is, we took the, better way to show you. So we took a graphic that actually DWR has put out there, and we have overlaid the time schedule. You can see, looking at the horizons I mentioned before, the 2020 deadline, what some of the things that DWR is going to come out with, and plotting how we get to that milestone, that ultimate milestone. The first graphic I bring to your attention. Next one was, you had these deadlines and you had these tasks that you had to accomplish. How does that fit into a work plan with just a schedule? No dollars attached at this point. So that's the next step we took, and we produced this document. Again, we're open to any feedback and direction you think in terms of the timeline, shorter, longer, realistic, unrealistic. I do want to point out here, this is a comment that we received in the past and actually heard again today, but we have included a technical review process. We have included a public review process. That's going to be ongoing. How we structure that, whether it's various committees, that's really to be decided. But you heard a good proposal from LPUG today. That's the kind of thing that we envision would be embarked on for one or more of the work plan elements, or even the entire groundwater sustainability plan. We recognize that that would be part of that. And so again, there's a line item to identify that as something that we encourage. All right, so now it gets us down to step 3. So this is the time of year where we develop our work plan and our budget and our spreadsheets. And those are reflected in the attachment 6D and 6E. So you have any questions so far? I'm just going to stop here because this is where I start getting into a bit of the numbers, how then you would essentially fund some of those activities. And I'm happy to go that next step if the board has...
Anybody have any questions? Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So the numbers that you see here are reflected in big worksheet you see here. We've used this format in the past. It's our line item budget. Starts off with our starting balance. In this case, we get this from our fiscal, slightly over 3.6 million or 3.7 million for today's sake. Revenues anticipated slightly over 865,000. Gives you about 4.5 million in overall funds available. And if you count everything together, this has been a roll-up, it's 3.6 million. So what are the assumptions? We'll start with the revenue. $6 pump charge. The $6 would be, you have to pick a pumping level. And in this case, conservatively, we've used 125,000 acre feet. You can look at the last 5 years, that was 131,000 acre feet. You can pick any number, and I'll show you those scenarios and how the revenue will fluctuate with the various pumping levels. So if you just take the $6...
Excuse me for a second,
yes.
Gerhard. Maybe Al can answer for me. What was the maximum in our original legislation for pump fees?
The original?
It
was $3.
Well, no, I mean, before the new GSA status, our legislation authorized...
We've always, for the last 7 years, our cap has been $6. We've been sitting at $4.
6, we raised it to 4 last July.
6 was the maximum.
Yes, and it is the maximum now.
Right.
Under our enabling legislation, 6 is the maximum. We can go to a higher number under our status as a GSA.
Thank you.
The simple math, 6 times 125,000 gets you your 750,000. We put interest down there where we traditionally get as part of the pool from the county at 15,000, and roughly project surcharge penalties at about 100,000. We traditionally have had higher. We had one operator that provided a larger amount. We don't anticipate that this fiscal year or even into future fiscal years. But that number is it's a professional estimate. So the work plan is divided into two sections. First section is what we call our core activities. We have 5 of them. We've added public outreach this year because, as you heard with the training video and some of the activities that we've done for the irrigation allowance over the past year, we do quite a bit of public outreach now. So administrative, fiscal, record, technical services, legal services, basically what keeps the agency operating. We also have a section 2 of the work plan, which I will go into much more detail in a moment. This is essentially some of the major programmatic initiatives, SGMA, the long-term issues over the coming fiscal year, and some of them, of course, will carry over into multiple fiscal years. This is what I'm referring to in terms of alternate pump charge revenue. So clearly, if you range it or you change the value in these scenarios, I've laid out 5 for you, or from $6 to $15. And if you were to use the 100,000 acre-foot value, the safe yield value currently being utilized, you can see the various revenues that would be generated. So if you were looking to fund all the activities that are in this draft proposal today, we can run various scenarios. And so, for example, if you were just looking to use the pump charge and to sustain the agency's operations, you roughly need about $7 an acre foot without getting into our fund balance or carryover. For doing everything in the section 1 and 2, you would need approximately $15. And if you were to do all the work plan without any of the carryover, you can see it's approximately $29. When we look at the work plan hours and the staffing, 1,800 hours equals 1 full-time equivalent. We use $90 staff blending rate. That's something that was discussed at a fiscal committee a couple years ago. These are the hours that you will see in the work plan. I rolled them up. There's an additional for section 1. We've broken them up, and as well as section 2. Just do the math with the total amount of hours times 90. It gives you the value you see on the right. We have our central service charges, and all of that equals the value you see in the far left or far right corner. Again, you change things. Of course, the number of values change based on what's been proposed. I just put this up here very quickly. I'm not going to go through it, but just give you some of the ideas of the things that we see just on our day-to-day operating, things that we will handle. Some of them are a bit extraordinary, but will take some of your time, some of our time. But this is just sort of the context of what do we spend our time on versus just handling the day-to-day operations. So there's quite a bit of things. Okay, so let's look at some of the fixed items within the budget. So we proposed $5,000 for an outreach and training facilities. And so I want to just remind the board, and you're well aware, in the budgeting process, we put out these proposals. In most cases, 95% of the cases, we will be coming back with you with a proposal on any of these specific items. So, for example, if we were to go with a facilitator or something, the well inspection program, which you just had a discussion on, that would be coming back to you for final ratification. But we put them in there, I would say a little more than a placeholder, but they're there so we have the authority, the funding ability to enact on those when we bring those proposals before you. Grant match, Brian mentioned it to earlier. This is something that LPUG came to us with in terms of potentially being a partner and having some money. So we put money there. Consultant contracts, again, that's sort of a placeholder if we were to utilize something beyond what we haven't specifically identified. We have outside legal counsel, 35, that's consistent with past years, and your board has $100,000 as contingency, that's carrying forth past policy. So let's get, this is the last stage of my presentation, and I'll be happy to answer any questions, but this is, I'm going to go through some of the areas of interest that you see in the Section 2 work plan. So what we've done, and if you see the order, and this is all supposed to align, it's taking the long-term issues, it's taking the SIGMA activities, it's the groundwater sustainability plan, and it's also looking at what priorities you approved in that ranking. I believe that was in December of last year, where you went very high, high, and high, medium, and low. And so we took all the highs, and you'll see that also represented in the work plan. So there is logic and rationale and hopefully what we've done and hopefully some alignment. So the first one, of course, and we've talked about this quite a bit, is the groundwater sustainability plan development. And the plan will be encompassing some of the other things that you see below it, which is looking at the yield and the water budget, looking at allocation systems, looking at our monitoring programs, looking at our BMOs and perhaps creating triggers, and ultimately the management strategy and the implementation of the plan. Groundwater basin boundary. The boundaries of the agency currently don't edge match with the Bulletin 118 in some cases, so we'll need to look at that, and the board may need to decide whether it wants to adjust those boundaries to accomplish them. So we put some time and effort into that. Looking at our basins and understanding the interconnectivity of each of them. Do we fully understand it? Are there some faults? Are there some structural controls? Are there some hydrology that we need to understand? And so we put some time and proposed some money aside for that. For some baseline, looking at our water level, water quality, land subsidence, is there better ways to monitor? Kathleen alluded to that we, the agency, we rely on others for the data. The county, United, some of the water districts, the cities, they provide that. What we'd be looking to see is that adequate for subsidence. There's been discussions with United staff. They're looking to do a subsidence monitoring program through USGS. That would be a partnership that we could embark with them down the road. So we put dollars and time for that. Monitoring network, already alluded to this, looking at our basin management objectives. Do we have adequate key wells? Do we need to augment that? And that would be a level of effort. This is very important. This one is sustainable yield, the water budget. We can't understand what's the inputs and the outputs and what's happening within each of the basins. In this case, we've listed all 7 of them. And some of the basins have a fair amount of understanding, and we wouldn't look to duplicate that. And some have less. And so there's a leveling of effort, and we would build on areas that have information, and those efforts that don't would, of course, require more work and time. Allocation system, heard the presentation today. We would either be looking at other allocation systems, we'd be receptive to ideas that folks have, and in some cases replacing or evaluating and then looking at them on a groundwater basin specific. Governance, this was a one in here. We put a small amount of money for third-party review if requested. Self-reporting, we've put as a placeholder, a straw man proposal, the self-reporting program with automatic meter reading. So that's something that the board can fund if they want. They can budget for it and have that discussion at a later date. You can have that discussion as well with what do you want to do with the inspection program. In some ways, they dovetail each other. You want a verification, you want an auditing program, you can accomplish that in various means, either having staffing, consultant, or the AMR technology. And then I believe this is the last category that we have listed. getting ready potentially for replenishment fee. There was effort right after Emergency Ordinance E about what the governance structure might be, what it might look at. This would be potentially getting a head start on that, or at least doing the initial steps. So our recommendation today is looking at the convergence of all of these core functions to look at the long-term issues and some of the anticipated tasks to fulfill SGMA and get us going on some of our long-term, perhaps short-term issues. Direction is sought from you today to, again, look at the activities. What are the things that we need to do? Prioritize that, perhaps. The schedule. Is the schedule that we've outlined reasonable in that framework? And then how do we pay for it? And lastly, then, the schedule either at a future board meeting or some subcommittee level work. Ultimately, of course, by July 1st, we need a budget in place so that we can work into the next fiscal year. And with that, I'd be happy to answer your question.
Members.
Thank you. Thank you, Gerhard.
You're welcome.
We all have that same goal of developing the sustainability plans. But frankly, it seems to me that all of this is ancillary to two questions. And there are two questions that are on this list, and one has to do with hydrology and the other is sustainable yield. Everything else is ancillary. Everything else is just details until you have the answers to those questions. And the approach to developing those questions is, as I was reading this report, I was reminded of a plaque that sits in the Reagan Library that says it's amazing how much work you can get done around here if you don't care who gets the credit. And I don't think that it's necessary to answer, at least I hope it's not, to answer questions about the hydrology and sustainable yield by going out and recreating the wheel. I think a lot of that data, a lot of that information, those studies have been done, and before we embark on the process of reinventing that wheel, we would be wise to know what studies are there, to have those studies evaluated. How old are they? Do they have any integrity? What holes are there in those studies? Have they been peer reviewed? Do they need to be peer reviewed? And when we do that analysis, then determine, all right, which wheels do we have to create? But since so much of that information is available, I don't see the need, as recommended both under A1 and A2, to go out and recreate the wheel. You know, there are plenty of resources locally to have those peer reviewed. We talked about a technical advisory committee. I think it would be really wise not to repeat the mistakes of the past with the technical advisory committee that once existed, but to truly develop a technical advisory committee made up exclusively of engineers, hydrologists, geologists, to evaluate some of that information that is otherwise available, and then to either come back with an analysis of the adequacy or the integrity of that information, or at least to come back and say, you know, these are the holes, you know, in this data that you want to concentrate on, or come back and say, you know what, all this is useless, you better go to work. But I don't think we start with the most expensive option available when there's so many resources that we can rely on. I thought it was kind of ironic in reading this that on mapping, the recommendation was to rely on the work being done by United and Callegas that you haven't seen, but to recommend that you develop new hydrology studies without assessing the studies you can see. So I think, as I said, I think those first two issues, the hydrology and the safe yield determinations, should be priority one, and I'd like to see staff come back with a more integrated approach that involves identifying and a mechanism for assessing the available data that includes independent technical advisory as well as a mechanism for a separate stakeholder review of that same data. My suggestion.
Okay. Dave?
I don't have anything to add to that. I have a lot of agreement with the similar comments. Safe yield numbers for the individual basins is going to be important. It's that first number that then people do the math from. It's how they achieve those allocations. whatever allocation methods they are. So, yeah, the hydrology and determining those numbers. And I think that's, again, a collaborative approach by technical folks, hydrogeologists, engineers, staff folks as well. There needs to be a meeting of those minds, essentially, to agree on those numbers. And then once those numbers are agreed upon, we move forward in all the basins with those allocation methods. I don't think I could agree more with that. The TAC has served this agency, the concept of a TAC has served the agency well in the past. I think it would be again, and I think it's going to be important to answer a lot of the ancillary questions that are going to come up with the formation of this GSP. And a lot of that work can be done by folks who are already being paid by other agencies. And we ought to be able to use that energy and that resource and assess what that is first. And then perhaps after that point, we fill in the gaps with consultant efforts if that's necessary. So those things make sound sense to me.
Steve?
To address the questions that were raised there, we have the responsibility by the state. We are the Groundwater Sustainability Agency. We have to make those decisions. And the experience that I believe we've had here is that it is good for us to try to cooperate and get data from others. But we have to have, I can't imagine any other responsible agency saying we are going to make the really hard decisions based on information that we get from others that we don't have the expertise, the ability to properly vet, etc. And it comes down to a question of degree and difference. But we have to make sure we have independent studies, analysis, data that our staff has great confidence in, that they can say, hey, we're confident about this. This may be a gray area in terms of you say, well, we want to vet that. But we have been down the road and had quite a bit of, we can't get that information at this point in time, or we're dependent upon their time schedule, or they want to do the modeling, but they don't want to do it for 2 more years. And we're not at that point any longer. We are the Groundwater Sustainability Agency. We have to make these decisions. To the extent that somebody happens to have data that we can get our hands on in a timely manner, great. But we have a responsibility to budget as if we don't have that information and we're going to get that. If we can get it, great. We don't spend the money. But we have to be prepared to do it because we have seen consistently roadblocks in terms of trying to rely on when other people are going to do studies, data, and their responsiveness appropriately is to their agency. And their agency may say, we decided to postpone that study for 6 months, or decided to postpone that study for a year. That doesn't work for us. So I want to address that probably fundamental disagreement about how much we rely as if we start everything that way. I think we start as if we need to do it, but we try not to do it if we can get confident, but somebody's on our schedule. But if we don't budget for it, and then somebody else, we're relying on some other agency, and they don't come through, we're stuck. And we're stuck with legal responsibility to adopt a plan, to move forward and to do those things. That's the comment with regard to what I heard there. Overall, I would suggest this, that where we were a month ago was a question to us, what do you think we should do? And quite frankly, the idea that the 5 of us were going to design anything like this in a discussion from the board is, I think we all can see, is, it couldn't have happened. It's not possible. We need, for this to go forward, a fairly technical issue, we need to have professional staff doing exactly what they did here. I don't know that we all agree with every detail in here, but in my mind, we're not authorizing that all this get done. We've been asked the question, and I appreciate your question, are we authorizing you to actually go? We're not authorizing to do all these things. We're authorizing them to begin to plan using this as the basis, but come back to us with the various steps so we can continue to modify. This is as good as I believe the 5 of us could come up with. in terms of trying to integrate both the long-term planning issues that they have here, which they use as a basis to say, all right, for better or for worse, staff said, we think this is the best solution, but it's just their recommendation to us in terms of the best solution. So we're going to budget for that, but we're not locking in for staff to do that. We're saying we have to give staff some basic budget to work with. So I like this, and for me, I think the fundamental question is, do we go to $15 pump fees, or do we go higher? You say to do everything, you need $29 pump fees if we're not going to touch the fine money. The fundamental question, one of the fundamental policy questions is, are we going to keep the fine money set aside, potentially for replenishment projects? Or are we going to tap into the fine money to keep the pump charges low to pay for the work? But we have hard work that we have to do, and we have to have the resources to do it. So in my mind, it's 15 or more, depending on what we want to do with that. And I'd love to have sort of our discussion about that. In my mind, I'm perfectly comfortable leaving the fine money set aside. So, and say, look, this is work, it's ongoing work, it has to get done, we should get this done, so that we have replenishment money set aside in case we come up with some project that is a supply replacement project that we need to move on. So I'd probably be willing to go higher, but I'd love to hear that discussion.
Steve, just to be clear, I agree with you that we need current, reliable, thorough, information to make the hard choices that we'll have to make. No disagreement. But I'm not convinced the only way to get it, or the best way to get it, is to go out and recreate the wheel. I'd like to see, before approving the most expensive possible options, I would like to see an analysis of what is available. Now, I don't want to rely on anything anybody in this room or anybody else gives me without having an independent assessment done, and not by staff. They don't have the time. But having it peer-reviewed by professionals whose business is studying these plans, so they can come back and say, you know what, you're missing this, or it's useless, you're going to have to go start. I don't want to rely on anybody giving me anything to make a decision until that independent assessment has been done. But I'm knowing the people in this room and the work that's been done, I'm sure that there'll be a large measure of the data that we need that's available for peer review that will be much more timely and much less expensive than going out and recreating the whole process.
Sure, I'm all hard if I can respond. I don't disagree. Okay, I don't disagree with that. I would just ask one thing. When you said reviewed by independent professionals, I would want to make sure those independent professionals are truly independent, and we believe that they are representing our quote, the public's general interest, not the interest of any other agency or anybody else. Yeah, exactly. If that's the case, I certainly don't mind waiting, and I think we're sort of saying the same. I'm saying we need to be ready, and we have a better chance of getting the cooperation of all these studies coming available if they say, hey, we're going to do it. If we don't get it from you in a timely manner, because that's been a problem, for us. But if we say we are ready, so I'm prepared to say, theoretically, we're ready to do it, which I kind of think you're saying if we can't get it any other way, you're prepared to do it. But I'm perfectly comfortable with saying, let's spend whatever time, let's spend the next meeting, 2 meetings, find out what is actually out there to help us, answer those questions in terms of that. And I'd love to hear sort of staff's analysis of that also. So don't completely disagree.
Charlotte.
Okay, I've got about 2 minutes according to that clock to say it. So I'm just going to say I agree with what Steve said, and I will have to leave.
Okay. Staff gave us 3 things to consider: activities, schedule, and financing. So I'd like to kind of address those issues. I think a lot of what I've heard here is essentially in the same, we're all in the same field of play. We may be in different corners of the field at this point in time, but I think we're all saying the right thing. So what I'd like to do is see if I can summarize what you're saying and throw in my 3 cents at the same time. Activities. I think that what we ought to do is direct staff to take the Sustainability Act as the goal and tell us how they are going to reach a sustainability act or a plan, how they're going to reach a sustainability plan by harmonizing all the things that they have and utilize the 3 focal points I think are critical to what we need to get done. I mean, as I chat with growers and as I think out in the field, if I were a grower, I would want to know 2 things. What's my allocation? What's my cost? And how much certainty can you give it? All the technical stuff in the back room is all technical stuff. I just want to know that I can sustain my business, what's the cost, and I have a planning process. I think the cities want the same thing. I think we all want the same thing. So what are the elements to make the essence of a sustainability plan work? And I believe they are, we've got to figure out sustainable yield determination. That's number one. I absolutely agree with that. It has to get done. And I agree that we have enough studies out there now that we can begin that process before allocating $1 bazillion. Let's see what we got. Let's do that process. My tasking to staff would be, I want a sustainability plan. I want the initial elements to be a sustainability yield. I think the 2 sides of the equation are the sustainability yield and an allocation process. We just heard today, which I think is a heck of a lot of work that the LPUG folks have put into a reasonable, well thought out, conceptual model of a sustainability plan. I don't know if it'll work in all areas, and I accept the fact that all areas may have to have a slightly different variation of it, but we need to get on with that process. I think if you have a allocation and you know what target you're going to run to in the yield, I think you have the core of how we get where we need to be. Everything else is filler. You added a 3rd item or a 2nd item as the key to it, and I would change that. I think finance is in fact the 3rd leg, if you want. And I would suggest, Dave is the chair of the Finance Committee, I would suggest that we have a Finance Committee meeting. I think we need to tackle the issue of what is going to be the funding vehicle of our pump charge, and what do we do with the excess monies that we have that we've received from surcharge penalties. What is that matrix going to look like? Are we going to continue to run the operation on a very limited pump fee and not have everybody have skin in the game, and then ride the wave of whatever pump fees we have, knowing, or surcharge fees, knowing that they are going to disappear as soon as the GREAT program comes online? So it is not an endless pile of money. Do we take that pile of money and begin shifting the cost of running the agency into the pump charge, and then shrink down the amount of tapping into that money to do these kinds of things that have to get done to create a sustainability plan, and yet have a significant amount of money left over to fund the studies for the laundry list of projects that he put up there, some up in the LPUG area, United's projects, bringing extra skids on board. I don't know what those projects are, but I think Jeff said it right. When we started this process a year ago, we were on the demand side. Now we also have authority on the supply side, and we need to seed that process, and we have the funds to do that. But we got to replace them somehow, some way. And I would encourage, Dave, that we have a fiscal committee to start tackling that issue on how we're going to divide these funds up going forward, and what's the recommendation to this board, and how we allocate those funds. Because I think right now those funds need to be allocated. There's a lot of folks that believe we're sitting on a pile of money, and what the heck are we doing with it? And there are a lot of folks that have said we need to invest in new supplies of water. We have the seed money. We've done it before with grants. We can do it again as seed money and move this project down the road. In terms of activities, so I support giving staff the direction to come back to us at the next meeting with the methodology to get to a sustainability plan, and the methodology to come up with how they're going to go about looking at sustainable yield determination on a basin by basin basis, how they might be able to take some of the elements of the LPUG allocation system or come up with a different scheme. And we heard today that they were going to form a Oxnard users group, and maybe the Oxnard users group, we need to hear their concept of an allocation scheme. I believe those are fundamental to getting a sustainability plan. I think the staff needs to come up with a methodology of how we're going to bring a sustainability plan on board. I do not believe that we have to go to Sacramento with the perfect sustainability plan. I don't believe that. I believe we have to go to Sacramento with a conceptual, workable sustainability plan that moves us down the road and that has holes in it, frankly, that will be plugged in and filled in as United finishes its model and others finish their modeling, and we can adjust for that. If you actually look at what the allocation scheme said is it's an allocation scheme that works regardless of, it's a system separate from what the sustainability number is. I think we can do that. I think we can go to Sacramento and say we have an allocation plan, we have a conceptual idea of where we think that sustainability number should be, but as it tightens up, we have an allocation system that can reflect that kind of tightening up. I think that is valuable. I think Sacramento right now would welcome a plan from this agency sooner than later, because I believe they look to this agency for guidance in what goes on in this state. And I think it's a negotiated item, and I don't want to spend 5 years or 3 years or whatever it takes to come up with a sustainability plan. I would say to staff, I think you need to come up with a model and a protocol and a design that gets us to a sustainability draft plan that we can take to Sacramento and have serious meetings with the state and the approval process a year from now. I think we ought to do that. I recall as a child when I sat in front of the TV, black and white little TV, and John Fitzgerald Kennedy, our president, said our goal is to put a man on the moon by the end of this century, and we galvanized this country. I think we can do the same thing. Now, for the folks that think, oh God, here goes Lynn again, he's going to railroad this thing through every loop in the world. If you haven't been sitting through these meetings for 27 years, you have not been paying attention to how I do business and how this board does business. The way we do business is we give ourselves some direction. We give direction to the constituents that we're going to focus on these issues, and we focus on those issues and move ourselves down the road. This is not an exercise in trying to railroad anything through. In fact, we went through that with the process that Steve and I talked about, and we now know what the key issues are. We're going to elevate 3 of those or 4 of those to the top and get on with the process. I think we can do that. And finally, I think that we need to make sure that we use our money wisely. And we need to do that by recognizing that we have a limited amount of funds right now. We need to spend that money in the right area, and we need to raise funds in the cost of running this agency. And I think if we do that, we can accomplish a lot. And I'm excited by what LPUG has done. I think they're on the right track. The devil's in the detail. I get that. I think that we're on the right track if we concentrate on these areas, and I think it meets the objectives that you guys have talked about. We're not spending a nickel until we see the actual numbers, but we're giving staff a definitive task to take all this information and give us a work plan. And I think we can do that. And that would be my recommendation. What do you guys want to do? What does the public want to do? Yes, sir.
Can I have my couple of minutes now?
Yes, sir. You're going to have to tell us who you are again. I'm sorry, it goes on tape.
Paul McDaniel, Secretary for Strickland Mutual Water. It's a volunteer, unpaid position. I was glad to hear your recent comments that you just said about getting a plan done. I think staff maybe lost the forest for the trees, because unless you can predict the rain, how can you predict sustainable yield? It's meaningless. And The experience of Australia might be illustrative. They had a drought that lasted 10 years from the year 2000 to around the end of the 2009 period, and they idled for years, and then they got desperate and they built desal plants as fast as they could build them. Really, the new price of water is $2,000 an acre foot. That's what we'll find out. So I see the agency and the board thinking, okay, we have new responsibilities now. We're going to be a groundwater sustainability agency. But I don't think you fully wrapped your head around that yet, because you need that plan before you have taxing authority on the groundwater that will fund real projects, millions of dollars, hundreds of millions, excuse me. And, I don't think people are comfortable with that yet. It sounds like, oh my God, we could make a mistake, build a plant, then it rained, we'd look like idiots. Take the risk. Don't take the risk the other way. The climate modelers, they tell us the melting of the Arctic ice increases the probability of the current type of weather conditions. I work for the Navy. I'm an environmental engineer. The Navy itself is planning to patrol an ice-free Arctic Ocean by the year 2030. Your past experience is not a guide to what is coming. So I can't believe that Fox Canyon, charged with monitoring and caring for the groundwater in their basin, can't already scratch together a plan in 3 months, at least a draft, and then you can review it and fine-tune it. But even a year is too generous. I'd start tomorrow.
Thank you. Robert.
Good afternoon, Robert Aranio, Crestview Mutual Water Company. I guess I'm just asking for some clarification. Given what I've heard from the board, the document that we have in front of us with the list of advantages and disadvantages, what happens to that now? We've been focused on this now for a year, sometimes doing fire drills in order to provide responses back to you in a timely manner. Is this document going to be put on a back burner now, or is it going to be integrated, harmonized, thrown away?
You just said the word.
Well, then go ahead, I'm sorry.
The tasking to staff is to take, and that's what they've asked for, the tasking to staff is to take this information and harmonize it into a process that gets us to a sustainability plan. I'm suggesting that of these work documents, there are 3 items in there that I would elevate to being the linchpin to getting to that sustainability plan, and that is the sustainability yield itself, the allocation system, and a funding system on how we're going to allocate the money to get this process done. And that will produce the sustainability plan. So I don't think we're saying that this whole document, wherever it is, gets thrown out the door, but we need to prioritize it, because now this document was started initially before we had the sustainability process. Let's harmonize it together. That's really, I think, the message that I'm trying to give to staff and to the board if they agree.
Okay. Well, then that brings me to a second point here, and this is going to put me in opposition to staff and what the report that Gerhardt gave. The recommendations that are presented to you in this, I believe, were created or were agreed upon in vacuum. There was no public input as to what is the preferred alternative of these that were here. Staff says that they got together a couple times and met within themselves. I don't know exactly whether that was 1, 2, 3, maybe 5, but it was not with a public conversation about what is the preferred alternative. There are some of these that I happen to disagree with, probably some other people disagree with too. And so if now we've taken 3 of these and we're already marching down the road based upon what I consider a flawed process in identifying what is the preferred alternative, I think you got a problem here. And it leads to a greater problem as to where is the confidence level of public input. Again, we keep hearing that there will be a public process in order for us to be able to discuss these matters, and yet I got a document here in front of me that took a major step beyond what the direction was provided at that last meeting when I sat there. They took it to the next step under their own words and have now provided back to you what is their recommendations without a public input. I have concerns about that process. Thank you.
Okay. Do you have any comments on that?
I do.
Yeah.
I think, Director West, you just saw Exhibit A of what I was referring to, right? Which is, people saying they need more process. I would just suggest this in terms of how I interpret it, because I know you sat right next to me here, Rob, when we did that. All we said to staff was, give us a starting spot. Tell us what you think, right? This is not a decision to adopt this. We're not adopting these recommendations of staff. We're simply saying, give us something for the public to react to. Give us something for us to react to. And that's what this really is. I'm not ready to say yes to all of the things in here in terms of their recommendations. But they said to try to blend that document in with the groundwater sustainability plan, they had to come up with something that they said from our perspective. Now, staff, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is your perspective at this point in time. There is a whole other public process that we'd have to follow, basically in this room, if we were going to do something else.
That's absolutely correct.
Thank you.
We had to start somewhere.
Thank you.
Yes.
And Robert, I think you can take some confidence in the fact that what you heard from the board wasn't an acceptance of what was presented. I don't think the staff came away with instructions to, implement any of this. What they got were demurs and disagreements and some different instructions. So to the extent that there's a question about process or dissatisfaction with the recommendations, I think what you heard is that that's shared.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Jeanette Lombardo with the CFAA, and I'll be your Exhibit B, Steve. I wanted to, first of all, thank Gerhard for the work. I think in the last year when we worked on the budget, I was the only one from the public that attended the committee on that, so I know how much work is put into this. I guess what I want to say is we've been a GSA for a very short time. We've only been under this for 4 months. The first thing that the state is working on is the basin boundary revisions, and that's going on this month. If you went to the Association of Water Agencies symposium last Thursday and listened to the panel that was speaking there, they talked about the next step is getting our stakeholder groups together and organized. The stakeholder groups are not the 30 people behind you. They are people you have never seen, and they're people who don't get along. They are environmentalists, they are industrial, they are municipalities, and they're agriculture. There is a lot to overcome, and the first thing you have to overcome in this grassroots effort is educating them so they can provide you valuable stakeholder input. And that means, one, they have to understand the goals of of SGMA, they have to understand the hydrology of their basins, and they have to understand the yield. So for them to get
a chance of understanding that until we do, so
yes,
that's the point of the discussion.
Yes, that's exactly what I was saying is we have to get the studies, to review the studies, to give the input. So I think we're sort of putting the cart in front of the horse a little bit here, but I know that we have to have a scope of work to do a budget, and we have to go forward. But I sort of agree with what a little bit what Robert was saying, was that from what we were given, it looks like there's been a game plan laid out that did not have stakeholder involvement in it.
Good God.
If I may, I disagree. I think
that's okay. You won't be the first person.
I think no. I think you're right, and I think what you heard earlier in Gerhard's presentation was that public outreach is an additional element that's been added now to this process and to this budget that wasn't there before, principally for the reasons that you mentioned. So I think that's part of the plan. It's just a question of sequencing. I don't think we're ready to do public outreach until we have something to describe and something to detail, and that's what the hydrology and the yield studies are about.
But if we want to move this process along in the time frames that have been suggested last meeting and this meeting, we've got to get the stakeholders together now. You can't just say, okay, stakeholders, we're coming together now. There is this education and outreach that has to be done before they can give you the input that you need to make these difficult decisions. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Tony Morgan, Deputy General Manager for Groundwater and Water Resources at United Water Conservation District. I think from the technical perspective, there's a place for moving ahead with stakeholder education and making sure they understand the process and what's going on. But at the same time, you can move forward with some of your technical activities that need to do so that you begin to weave these two things together down the road, and one isn't lagging far behind the other one. I think it's appropriate for staff to go ahead and begin to think about studies that might be done, looking at what data you have and don't have, where are the data gaps, how reliable is the information, how are we going to get that information that we don't have that we feel is critical. I think that's appropriate and certainly something that needs to start sooner rather than later. There are draft outlines of what a sustainability plan might look like already out there and being circulated for comment and review. So it's not like we have no target to aim at as to what the sections are going to be, and we can begin to say, do we have data for this? Yes, we do. Okay, we think we're solid. Nope, we don't have anything for section 3. We're going to have to work on that. So we have the ability to move forward with this and make some progress. One of the things I would ask the board to begin to do is you're going to help your staff immensely if you begin to think about the policy issues that are going to drive the sustainable number, that yield number that you want to do. What are you going to do with seawater intrusion? What's the board's perspective on that? What's the planned goal going to be? Leave it alone, push it back, do nothing? It's a policy decision on what you're going to do. The DWR is going to ask you in your plan to identify triggers, goals related to water quality. What's an unreasonable degradation of water quality occur in the basin? You've got to begin to think about that from a policy. There's technical elements to that as well, but you've got to begin to think of that from a policy perspective so that gives staff some sort of framework within which to work. If you just cast it out there, it may or may not come back with a system that's consistent with your policy decisions that you want to make. So what I'm urging you today is don't forget about the policy things, because you make staff's job more difficult if they don't have that framework within which to operate.
What I would ask that my proposal would be that we've given staff, I would propose that we give staff a marching order, a timeline. They need to come back to us and tell us what elements they need to build this process, and where are the decision points that are policy decisions. When the county said we need a new, I assume when the county said we need a new hospital and they handed that problem to staff, staff came back and said, okay, how many beds do you want in the hospital? That's a policy decision, because that drives the cost, right? That dialogue will happen in this process. That's the public process, and this is the forum for that kind of discussion. And I would hope that as people come to grips with where we are in our current situation and where we have to go in the future, they will start coming and packing this room as we had once before, and that's part of the outreach program. So your suggestions are valid. Staff has heard them, and I think they'll build that into it.
Thank you.
Tony, I wonder if I might be permitted a couple of questions of Tony for Board Member West's benefit. You're working on a groundwater model for the Oxnard basins, Pleasant Valley, Forebay, Pressure Point, right?
Correct.
You've expended a sum of money.
Correct.
How much?
I don't know. I have to go back and tally it up.
Well, your initial estimates for the cost of that model somewhere in the millions?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's due in December. No one's ignored that. No one's reinventing the wheel. What's suggested in this document is just what Tony's suggesting. There's a lot of policy issues you're going to have to wrestle with. And what Tony's model does at this point assumes certain policies that may or may not, and he's cautioning you to maybe want to revisit those. So we can bring those back early. Right now, as I understand it, the policy behind Tony's model is to hold the seawater intrusion where it's at.
It's current conditions. Where are we at today?
Current conditions, right.
Where are we at today? What systems do we have for managing water today?
And you've also, as you presented to this board, you've also presented a brackish program to help in that process.
Correct.
That program is going to eventually, that program will take 10 years to bring on board. And the sooner we get a plan, the sooner we have the authority to do the funding. All of it's tied together. So that's why I have this sense of urgency, not because I think it needs, because to get these programs on the supply side to help the demand side.
And the implementation or not of that brackish water plant relies, at least in part, on your policy decisions. If that plant is inconsistent with your policies of how you wish to handle seawater intrusion, then it doesn't go forward. But if it's consistent with it, then we can look at moving it forward.
Okay.
And there might be some changes required to our enabling act or to in Sacramento if you change the current policy.
Okay. Jurgen.
Okay.
Thanks. Tony, hold on.
Just want to point out, because I think it is very germane to the comments that you made, staff in their recommendation on this worthless document that they worked on here says specifically, they highlighted that they believe that their recommendation is that we rely on the United and the Casitas and others to provide model assumptions, input, analysis, and determinations with in-house validation. I think that's consistent with what you're talking about, and that is exactly what I think they've identified also. So this is not inconsistent with, I think, what we're hearing. What staff's coming up with is not inconsistent with, I think, what we're hearing us say.
Jurgen.
Jurgen Gramco, former sod grower. At the rate I'm taking sod out of production, I may solve your overdraft problem all by myself.
There was a time a long time ago, your brother said I could fly my ultralight off your sod fields. Now that option's not on the table.
That's a short runway now. I read the Las Posas plan, and it's got a tremendous amount of detail, and there's just yeoman's work there. And, I think they've done a terrific job, and I would encourage you to allow them to continue down that path. And so that raises a question for me, and I've struggled with this, and Jeff, you were at that CoLab meeting where I was trying to nail Rob on this question. When the Sustainable Groundwater Act was enacted, Fox Canyon was held out as the GSA for its current management area. Yet there are 7 basins in this management area, and were it not for the fact that the Fox Canyon existed, we'd have 7 different GSAs. So I keep struggling with whether it's a good thing or a bad thing to have the GMA be in charge of these 7 basins. So I think the Las Posas group has moved in a direction that is very positive and is all about dealing with the issues in their basin. And I'm thinking you're giving them some positive feedback. So when other basins start to form some kind of managerial direction, I'd like to get some clarification, and you don't have to do that here today, but maybe it's a question for staff to deal with and come to the next meeting with. Is what's going to be the relationship between groups like the Las Posas Users Group and the GMA? Is there going to be some degree of autonomy? I mean, is it going to be you only bring to us global issues, or do you bring to us every issue that you would bring to any GSA, because we are the mother of all GSAs? So I'm not trying to throw stones here, but I'm really struggling with where are those lines going to be.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody else? Anybody else? All right. I've made a pitch and a recommendation. What do you guys want to do?
I would just like to, a couple things. Number one, in answer to, or in response to Mr. Gramcow's comments, to the extent that these basins are interconnected, and what happens in one basin affects the other, I think overall you have to say it's a good thing that you have Fox Canyon over all of those, because those places where it's not, they're going to have to spend an enormous amount of time trying to get edge matching and dealing with those issues. So you have the opportunity, depending on how well we handle it here, you have the opportunity to come up with a comprehensive plan that does take into account the fact that they are related. I am generally supportive of what you're saying. I'd just like to clarify it a little bit more in terms of the motion that I would make, and that is under scheduling, you said you'd like to have them do it in a year. My proposal was to go no longer than what they have on this schedule. So I'm fine with a year, but to go no longer than what they have on the schedule in terms of let's say this is what they're saying they think they need. You're saying you hope they can accelerate that and get it done in a year. I think that's a great goal for them to have.
Well, and let me clarify that.
Right.
And as Tony indicated, there are folks right now that are producing draft documents.
Right.
I'm not saying this is a plug and play. Pull it off the shelf and put our numbers in and you're good to go. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is we do not have to have the perfect document, because even if we spent 5 years to make the document, the day we submit it, we'll make changes to it because we learned something because it's already 5 years old. So let's not try to get 100% document agreement. Let's get a high percentage of the document agreement with the caveat that we have a system that will allow for flexibility and changes and move that through.
I agree with you. What I do think we want to have is a reliable document.
Reliable.
We have confidence in, but it does not have to be a perfect document by any means. So in terms of schedule, that would be the direction I would give staff, which I think is fairly consistent with what you're saying. In terms of activities, you had said come back to us at the next meeting, and I would say come back to us as expeditiously as possible with exactly what we're asking for, which is an analysis of what is the data out there, what is it that they think we need to do independently because it just doesn't exist, what is the data that they think, well, if we can get this properly vetted, we don't have to do that. They have not built in $1 million modeling study that Tony's just come up here and talked to us about. They're saying they think we can rely on that. But let's actually have that broken down as quickly as possible. The next meeting, that's fine. That would help us plan, and it would certainly help Dave as he gets there and starts to think about financing that you said. And I'm fine with your recommendation, which is let's find out from the committee. But I would like to offer and suggest that our starting point is we should have the pump charges fund the operational cost of this agency, whatever it is we decide that they are, and have the fines be used for special projects, replenishment projects, et cetera, and not be going that way. That would be, so those would be things that I think, and Charlotte's not here, she can't vote any longer, but she was generally saying that. And then the final thing I would offer is that we accept this as simply a starting spot. We don't agree with all the things in here, but it is a starting spot, or it's a receive and file that we recognize this is staff's best effort at combining all of the things that are out there, because staff has to have something to begin to build some kind of template of a budget for us, has to have something to build, something to bring to Dave's committee. And that's all that it is. We still have to decide whether we're going to do those things. We have to have public testimony about that. So that would be how I would clarify in my mind and feel more comfortable with a motion like that.
The only change I would ask, and that I would disagree with, I don't want to say to the fiscal committee, 15 and the 2 are separated. I don't think that's a decision we need to make now. I think what you need to say to the fiscal committee is we need to take a hard look at what we're doing and where that money is being spent. And we need to figure out how to allocate it, and you need to be able to explain, and staff needs to be able to explain how this allocation is reasonable and fair. And at that point in time, we're in a position to say, we agree or don't agree, we should move this bar left or right.
Well, then let me ask you this.
I don't want to presuppose an answer as part of the committee. I want the committee to do the homework of analyzing it.
I'm not sure that we're disagreeing.
Okay.
I'm not giving them a number when I'm saying this, but I am asking this question. It's a policy question.
It is a policy question.
Does this board, at the beginning, at the onset, think that we should be using the fine money for the operational costs, the annual operational costs that we're going to have to engage in to come up with a groundwater sustainability plan, or should we use pump charges? That's a policy. Now, once let's say that we adopt, we may say we're not ready to do that. That's fine also. But if we are, I'm ready to say I think we should do that. That way, when Dave's group committee meets and they decide that it needs to be X amount of money, they know, okay, then that money needs to come from pump charges. Or if that's not our policy and we say we want to use the fine money, then they can come up with different pump charges, et cetera. So that's the question I have, and I'm just curious. I'm there, but maybe we're not there yet. Are we there yet? Or
I have a question, Stephen. The you mentioned pump charges for, operating the sustainability plan, but the cost of developing the sustainability plan will be different than the operating the sustainability plan. And
the operation of the agency.
Operation of the
agency, which is the development of the plan.
I just want to understand.
Right. Okay. Do you have a view on that? That's my question.
My view on that, I think it's a absolutely perfect question. I think that the question is, what's the sequence? I think we ought to have a fiscal committee. I think we ought to debate at the fiscal committee. I think the fiscal committee needs to come back to this board with a series of recommendations, and that becomes the basis of how we have the discussion. Now we actually have something to decide, and it's agendized so that we can actually make that decision.
It's a little bit like last time when we asked staff to come with a recommendation to us. I would just offer that we could be potentially wasting their time if the majority of us have already said, hey.
Okay, and in answer to that question, I'm not willing to make that commitment
great.
now.
That's fine. If the majority of us are already saying we don't want to use the fine money for this, which I've heard from people that they don't, and I'm in agreement. If that's where we are, but if that's not where we are, that's absolutely fine.
Okay. I'm not willing to figure out how to divide the pie yet.
So
I think it needs to be divided.
I'll withdraw that from the motion.
Okay.
Great.
If I can just slip in another clarification, we're asking staff to do an analysis of available data, what's missing, come back to us with an idea. It seems to me that discussion is important before we have the fiscal discussion about what we need to budget. To budget a gross number without a real solid concept about what it's going to cost to get the remaining data that we need, I think is lost effort. So I would suggest that, again, going back to the TAC concept, pull that TAC committee back together. Those are individuals such as Mr. Morgan, such as Callegas, that have money in the game, developing models, doing these various studies. Many of them have already been done. Get together with staff, do an accounting of what information is out there, and then let's get that report, let's get that analysis. Then we'll have our fiscal meeting.
But the question that Director Bennett asked doesn't need a budget. We know that there'll be increased costs from whatever sector with respect to development of the plan in the next year or two. And so I guess the question first is, even without the particulars of a budget, how do we go about funding that? Whatever that cost ultimately is, are we going to fund it exclusively through pumping charges? Are we going to fund it through the use of the surcharges, fines, bond funds? Who knows? But the
I agree. That's a separate policy question.
That's a separate policy question
Yes.
that precedes the actual budget. The one point I would ask, I guess I'm not sure if it's a combined motion, but the one thing I would ask when staff comes back with that assessment about the data, to the extent that there is data out there, perhaps give us some ideas or some options for how to get that data vetted, how to get the peer reviews, how to get the independent analysis of the data.
Not to throw a total monkey wrench into this. My proposal would not include telling staff to go out and tell us what data is out of there. That's a specific task, okay? My proposal to staff was, here's the goal, I say 1 year. Here are the elements that will help us get to that goal: sustainable yield, allocation system, and financing. You tell us at the next meeting, this is why it's the next meeting, what the process you're going to use to to get to that objective. It may be that we're going to, step one is we're going to do an analysis of all the available data. They're going to tell us what that sequence is. I want to be careful that we stay at what I'd call the 30,000 foot level. And the reason I want to do that is because I think that's where in a lot of ways we've gotten ourselves into trouble, is that we've tried to tell staff, do these specific little 5 items, and they do those 5 items, and then they stand up here in front of us, and then we go, why are we doing this? Because you told us to do this. And what I would rather do is say, as a board of directors of a corporation, I want to see a 20% increase in the number of cars coming out of my production plant. Now the rest of you go to the back room. I want to see you in 2 weeks, and you tell me how we're going to do this. Boss, we need to build an assembly line. Boss, we need to make a bigger building. Now I let them come up with the solutions. So my recommendation, if you're going to make the motion, or somebody's going to make a motion, is the motion to staff is a simple motion. Our target date is 1 year from, not less than 1 year from now. It'll have elements of safe yield, allocation, finance, and how we're going to build a plan to get there. I want you, staff, to tell us what you need, what you have, and how you're going to do it. And then let them plug in the process. And then I can either yay or nay the process. And it's no different than when you guys built the hospital. You said, we want a hospital. And you sent it back to the hospital staff, and they said, well, we need 1,000 beds and we need 15 stories. And you said, nah, I don't think that's going to work. That was a policy decision. Scale it back, or whatever, however you guys did it.
Chair Mulhart, it sounds like you just made a motion.
Are you okay with that?
Sure. There's lots of different ways to get this.
All right. My motion is, all right, then I will do that. My motion is to direct staff to come back to us next month with their plan on how to reach a sustainability plan in less than a year that addresses the sustainable yield, the allocation system, and the finance system of how we're going to get there, so that we have something to debate, and give us as much broad room as you can in your staff report, so we can make multiple decisions and things that we've talked about that need to be done. That's my motion.
I'll second the motion.
Can I just,
Yes.
for the benefit of staff, Tony Morgan said, to the extent that we identify those policy things the staff needs to know, to the extent that staff needs something from us to be able to do that we make sure that staff tells us.
It has to be
these are the
included in that.
policy decisions
Absolutely.
that we got to have, we can't give you an answer until you give us this
Question.
policy direction. Right. So if you'll ask them for that also.
All right, and to include, you need to tell us those decisions you need us to make so that you can implement the plan that you outline. Okay? Jeff, you okay with that?
Got it.
All right. That's the question.
Clear as mud.
All right. Roll call.
Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Director Bennett? Director West?
Yes.
Director Borchard?
Yes.
Okay. We have, we're going to, folks,
Chair Mulhart,
Yes.
because of the time, I'd like to ask your consideration of moving the executive officer's report up above the closed session.
Okay.
It's of interest to someone in the audience, and
All
I'm
right.
sure they need to.
Does anybody, do I have a motion to accept the executive officer's report before we go into
Oh,
closed
no,
session?
no, I just
I'm
want to
sorry.
move it in, yeah. And on the executive officer's report, assuming that was approval of that request, there's a letter in there from Camarillo, the city of Camarillo, requesting a hearing on the Pleasant Valley desalter. Knowing the amount of work that we have to do at the next May meeting, your board has already set aside times for alternate meetings, and the time you set aside for an alternate meeting in the month of May was May 8th. So we'd like to know if your board would like to meet on that date to discuss the Pleasant Valley desalter, and if so, do you want to meet at 9 in the morning or at 1:30 in the afternoon?
Okay. Gene, 9 in the morning or 1:30?
I'm signing in to find my...
Okay. Steve?
May 8th. Did I get that right, Jessica? That's the date your board, I believe it was January, you adopted alternative.
Yes. I'm good for May 8th. I'm good for May 8th, and I'm flexible on 9 or 1:30. What do you guys want to do? Do you want to come at 9 or 1:30? Okay, thank you for that. Oh. 1:30? Yeah, all right. So we're going to do it at 1:30.
For the record, Lucy McGovern with the City of Camarillo, 1:30.
You read our mind. See, the communication is unbelievable. Okay, with that, as part of the executive officer report, can I have a motion to adopt the executive officer's report? And a second? Okay, any discussion? Hearing none, so ordered. All right, folks, we're going to adjourn to closed session. Tony, I'm sorry, Al, you have to make any announcements?
No, other than to ask or to point out there's no urgency on this matter, and in view of the hour, if your board...
Okay, are you guys okay rolling this to next month? This item, this closed session? That way we have a full board. Okay, we're not going to go to a closed session. We're going to do it next month. All right, very good. All right.